Good evening, friend, and welcome back. It is a good night to be inside, and I'm glad you are here. Let your head rest all the way back into the pillow. Your hands can grow still now, wherever they are. Your eyes may close whenever they feel ready. Tonight, we're going to a winter's night in London in the year 1684, in the reign of Charles II. The River Thames has frozen 12 inches deep from Westminster down to Southwark, and Londoners have laid a whole town on top of it. 2 lines of tented booths run from the Temple stairs across to the Barge House on the far bank, a lantern at every corner. About 40 coaches ply the ice as if it were a street. A printer at 6pence a name is doing £5 a day. Who kept the light for a city walking on top of its own river on the coldest night that river ever knew? If a story like this one is a good place for you to fall asleep, a subscribe or a gentle like helps these long histories find the people who want them. But there is no need to do that now. If you would like, tell me in a comment where in the world you are listening from tonight. I like to think of someone in a warm bedroom with the lamp turned low and someone driving a long quiet road. Now dim the last of your lights. Let the fan hum. Come with me. Let us go back, all the way back to the frozen face of the River Thames on a London evening in January of 1684. The light is going. It has been going since 3, in the slow, patient way winter light goes over London in the last week of January, and it is going now in the last quarter hour before dusk on the 24th of the month, in the year 1684. We are standing at the top of the Temple stairs, the old worn stone steps that come down from the lawyer's garden of the inner temple to the water gate of the Thames. Ordinarily the tide at this hour would be running out under the water gate, and a waterman with his wherry would be waiting 3 steps below the top for a fare to Westminster or to Whitehall, and a small greasy rope would be knotted through the iron ring set into the wall for that purpose. Tonight there is no water at all. Where the water should be, 12 inches of ice runs from bank to bank, from the base of the Temple stairs across to the marshy shoreline of Southwark on the far side, and where the wherries should be, there is a fair. You have never seen anything like it. That is the plain first sentence to say. Even a Londoner who was born in this city and has lived every day of 45 years on its streets has never seen anything like it. Because a fair of this size and this settled character has never before been built on the frozen face of this river. There have been ice fairs on the Thames before, in the memory of the very oldest. There was one in 1565 in the reign of Elizabeth. There was one in 1608 and 9 in the reign of James I. There was another in 1634 and 5 in the reign of the elder Charles. But the fair we are looking down on this afternoon is a fair of a different order. It has streets, it has booths, it has coaches on it, it has a printer working, it has, they say, about 120 tents pitched in 2 lines, and it has been going for the best part of 3 weeks already, and it will keep going for another 2. Let us come down the steps together. There are 12 of them from the lawyer's garden to what is now the ice, and they have been dusted with a mixture of sand and coal ash by the boys of the Temple to give a person some grip in the going down. You can hear your own boots on the sand. You can hear from below the general good-humoured noise of a market at its full afternoon, the calling of prices, the ringing of a small handbell somewhere, the low steady rumble of a coach going by on wooden wheels over ice, the shouts of children. At the foot of the stairs, on the ice itself, a waterman stands. He's a wide short man in a long broadcloth coat, his hands in coarse wool mittens, a felt hat pulled down against the wind up the river. His name is not written down, and we shall not invent one for him. He's one of the 20,000 watermen who work the London River as a whole, and he is one of the several hundred who have converted their wherries to sledges for the duration of the frost. And this afternoon he's minding the stair for a farthing, or a penny from anyone who wants an arm to lean on stepping down. You do not need his arm today. You have been walking on winter pavements all your life, and you have a good pair of leather shoes, with wooden pattens strapped underneath. But it is polite to give him the farthing anyway, and you do, and he touches the brim of his hat, and you step off the last stone step and out onto the ice. The ice takes your weight without a sound. That is the first small wonder. You had expected some faint answering noise from beneath, a settling groan, a soft complaint, the way ice on a pond will sometimes speak when you step onto it. But this ice is thick. It is 12 inches from top to underside in the measurement Londoners are using this month. That is a foot of solid frozen river between the sole of your shoe and the deep dark water still moving quiet and unseen below. A coach and 6 horses passed a test of that ice on the 5th of January by driving all the way across the river for a wager, and every day since then the ice has grown a little thicker under it. Underfoot it is not smooth. Along the middle of the lane it has been worn a little slippery by the constant passage of feet, but it has also been scattered with straw for grip, and the straw has been trodden into a soft matted brown pathway. Off the pathway the ice is white and rough, frozen in successive layers over 3 weeks, dusted at the surface with a fresh skin of snow that fell in the small hours of this morning, and has been blown about ever since by the small cold wind that runs upriver from the Pool of London. Around you the fair is at its bright afternoon. The 2 lines of booths run away from you along the length of the river, a lane between them perhaps 8 or 10 paces across, a lane thick with people moving up and down at the slow, crowd pace of a market at its full. The booths themselves are square, roofed and walled with tented sailcloth, each about the size of a small country cottage, each with a corner post from which hangs a horn lantern not yet lit. Above every booth a thin thread of blue-grey smoke rises from a hole in the sailcloth roof, from the charcoal brazier that warms the inside. Between the smokes you can look up and see the 2 Londons of this year facing each other across the river. To the north, over your shoulder, the low huddled houses of the Strand, and the water gates of the great mansions climbing toward the 200-year-old skyline of a city still finishing itself after the great fire of 18 years ago. To the south, the marshy fields and timber yards of Southwark. And between them, planted where the wherry boats would normally sit, the black stone bulk of Old London Bridge, its 19 narrow arches choked with ice, its upper deck still carrying its solid crush of shops and dwellings, chimney smoke rising steadily from every roof line. Standing beside you at the foot of the Temple stairs, wrapped in a good broadcloth coat with a fur collar, is a man of about 63. His name is John Evelyn. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society. He is a gardener. He is a courtier. He is a diarist, though very few people know that about him yet, because his diary will not be published in full for another century and a half, and even then it will come out slowly, one edition at a time. He has come down from Whitehall this afternoon to see the fair for himself. 3 weeks ago, on the 9th of January, he walked across the ice from Westminster Stairs to Lambeth, and dined with William Sancroft, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in the great hall of Lambeth Palace. This afternoon he's on his 2nd visit, and tonight, when he goes home to Sayes Court in Deptford, he will write down in his diary the sentences that will fix this fair in the English memory forever. Let us stay near him for a while. He is a good companion at the top of a stair, at the beginning of an evening. He is warm-hearted, well-read, and he has the kind of quiet attention that notices everything. As he steps off the ice and looks about him, his eyes go first to the lantern on the ice at the corner of the nearest booth, unlit as yet, but hung ready. Then his eyes go up the length of the lane. Then he begins to walk, and we walk with him, because the lantern at the top of the next booth is where we're going, to see how a fair is built on frozen water. Before we go any further along the lane, let us stand for a moment where we are and think, softly, about how this river came to freeze. It is a question that carries most of the reasons the fair around us was possible at all, and it is a very old English kind of question, the kind that a schoolmaster of this century might set to a boy in the last hour of an afternoon. The Thames is a tidal river. Where we are standing, between the Temple stairs and Southwark, it rises and falls twice a day by the pull of the moon on the ocean at its far mouth. In an ordinary winter the running of the tide keeps the water moving, and moving water does not freeze easily. A pond can lock hard in a single hard night. A running river ordinarily will not, because every moment fresh unfrozen water is being brought up under the surface from below. That is the general rule. The reason the Thames of this century does not obey that rule as strictly as it should is a bridge. Old London Bridge, half a mile down the river from where we stand, has been in place since the year 1209, finished in the reign of King John. It is more than 470 years old this month. It carries on its upper deck a solid crush of shops and dwellings, 4 and 5 stories tall, packed shoulder to shoulder along its length like a small town in the air. And below its upper deck, sunk into the bed of the river, are 20 piers of stone, each protected by a great oval island of piled timber and rubble called a starling. Between the 20 piers are 19 narrow arches, and through those 90 narrow arches the whole tidal Thames must squeeze its way, upstream and downstream twice a day, for as long as the world has run its clock. You can imagine, without being told, what a hindrance this makes. When the tide is running full, the water sluices through those 90 narrow gaps at a considerable speed, and the noise of it is one of the oldest sounds of London. Watermen prefer not to shoot the bridge at all if they can help it. They land their passengers above it or below it and walk them round. When they must shoot it, they call it shooting the bridge, and it is a small trade of its own to know how to do it. Now think what happens in a very cold winter. The narrow arches, in a normal year, gather driftwood, boughs, weeds, and the rubbish of the river as the water squeezes through them, and every so often the watermen and the Bridge House Trust send a crew out to clear the arches. In a very cold winter, they gather ice as well. The ice comes down river in small pieces first, in flakes of the size of a man's palm, and it lodges against the timber starlings, and it builds up in the arches, and it dams. The narrow arches, choked with ice, hold back the water above them just long enough for that water to slow, and slowing water freezes. Above the bridge, the river becomes a slow lake. Below the bridge, it stays fast enough not to lock hard, and that is why the ice on the Thames of this month has run from Westminster down to the bridge, and why we can walk on it, and why below the bridge the river is still liquid enough to carry a coal collier down from Wapping to the pool. That is one half of the answer. The other half of it is the winter itself. The autumn of last year, 1683, was a mild one at first. Then, on or about the 16th of November, the wind veered to the northwest. The weather turned. The days grew colder. There was frost most mornings, but it was a small frost, the kind that thaws by 10 in the day, and Londoners went about their ordinary Michaelmas business. Around the middle of December, on either the 15th or the 19th, the frost stopped thawing. That was the day the Londoners of this year would afterwards call the beginning of the real frost, because it did not go away. It stayed. It deepened. Wells froze in Kent that had never frozen in living memory. Water in horse troughs froze in an hour. Coal in an open cart froze together in the coal. Slowly, over the next 2 weeks, the Thames responded. Ice formed at the banks. It thickened. It reached out toward the middle of the river. By Christmas Eve, a beaten track had been made across the ice near the banks from London Bridge to Whitehall, a track kept open by the passing of some thousands of people, in the phrase the newswriters used. The middle of the river was still free, but the flakes were gathering at the starlings of the bridge, and the arches were beginning to choke. On the 5th of January the ice locked. It was a Saturday. And by way of testing its strength, a coach with 6 horses was driven all the way across the width of the river for a wager, and the ice passed the test. Next day, being a Sunday, was quiet on the ice, but on the Monday the 7th, the watermen began pitching booths at the banks, and by the middle of the following week the whole width of the river between the Temple and Southwark had been quietly commandeered, and rows of booths and stalls had sprung up along its length. By the 15th of January the fair was in full swing. That is the story of how the frozen face of the Thames became the ground under our shoes tonight. It took the 19 narrow arches of an old bridge to be a slow dam, and it took the coldest winter in the memory of this country in 1,000 years to lay the ice on top of that dam. Neither on its own would have been enough. Both together made a fair. We are standing on the result. There is no need to hold on to any of the mechanism if you did not follow it all. The mechanism is only there to give you the small quiet pleasure of knowing that a fair on a river does not just happen. It is made, over weeks, by weather and by an old bridge, and it is only laid open to be walked upon by ordinary Londoners once the two of them have done the years of their patient work. The lantern on the ice at the next booth is where we're going. It was pitched here by a poor waterman 2 weeks ago, and he is standing beside it now, and his sailcloth walls are still up. The booth at the corner of Freezeland Street nearest the Temple Stairs is one of the oldest booths on the fair, in the sense of having been the first pitched on this stretch of the ice. The man who pitched it is standing at its door now. Let us say his name was John. It is the commonest man's name in London this century, and it will do for a booth-keeper who has not left his own name in the record. He is a waterman by trade, a Wapping man, one of the 20,000 or so licensed watermen and lightermen of the London River, and he has been out of paid work since the 5th of January when the river froze under him. He's about 40. He has the build of a man who has rowed a wherry for a living since he was 14. Wide shoulders, short strong legs, a chest that fills a broadcloth coat, hands the colour and hardness of leather, a face weathered by every kind of London weather, wind and sun and coal smoke and rain and now frost. He wears a good felt hat pulled down against the wind, a knitted wool muffler wound twice round his neck, wool mittens on his hands, and thick woolen leggings under his breeches. On his feet are the leather shoes he rows in with wooden pattens strapped underneath to lift his sole a little clear of the ice. He has a wife and 3 children. The wife is inside the booth at this moment, tending the copper kettle over the charcoal brazier. The eldest child, a boy of about 10, is helping her. The younger 2 are asleep in a nest of wool blankets on a folded stack of sailcloth against the back wall of the booth. This whole tented mansion has been John's home for the last 2 weeks, since the day the ice locked and he understood quickly that the fair he was watching being born was going to be the family's only living for as long as the frost held. The booth itself is a small square of tented sailcloth, perhaps 8 feet by 10, walled and roofed by the sails, masts and oars of John's wherry, which he has taken apart and reconfigured for this purpose. The rig is called by the ballad singers of this month Sailcloth Mansions Tentwise Framed. It is not a bad name. The 2 main masts of the wherry now stand upright as corner posts. The sails, unshipped and laid over a frame of the oars, form the walls and the sloped roof. The whole is lashed at the corners with tarred hemp cord, and the joints between the sails are the joints they were sewn at. Inside the booth it is unexpectedly warm. That is the first thing you notice when you step through the flap. The outside is a freezing London January, with a wind up the river cutting at the fingers even through wool mittens. The inside is closer to the temperature of a well-kept kitchen, kept there by the small tin charcoal brazier standing on 3 iron legs in the centre of the floor, filled with the glowing orange coals of a shovel of quick-burning charcoal. Above the brazier hangs the copper kettle of hot spiced ale. In the brazier's warmth John's wife stands, ladling the ale into pot cups for the 2 customers at the counter. The floor of the booth is not ice. It is a laid floor made of boards from the wherry's own bottom, laid over a layer of fir branches which sit directly on the ice. This is a small ingenious insulation. The fir branches trap air. The boards do not conduct the ice's cold up into the standing bodies of the people inside. Ordinary booths of the fair have this same construction. The watermen have known how to lay a warm floor since childhood, from laying warm floors in Wapping cellars during the wet seasons of ordinary winters. The counter is a plank of wherry timber laid across 2 barrels. On it stand the copper kettle of ale, a wooden bowl of small cakes, and a small wooden till with the day's pennies in it. Above the counter, hung from the corner post, is the horn lantern. It is not lit yet. It will be lit within the half-hour when the last of the day's light drops out of the sky. John's wife pours the 2 cups. She's a plain-speaking woman of about 35, in a linen headcloth and a stout wool cloak over her working gown, with a knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders under the cloak against the small cold that even in this booth is always present at the seams. She takes the 2pence for the ale in her palm and drops it in the till. She wishes the two men a good evening. They touch their hats to her and go out into the lane. John himself at the door is greeting a passing acquaintance, another waterman, a friend of his brother's who works out of the Falcon Stairs on the Southwark side. The two of them stand talking for a minute about a piece of business at the Waterman's Hall this morning. The Company of Watermen and Lightermen, chartered by an Act of Parliament in 1555, is the trade body of the licensed men of the river. Twice this month they have distributed money to their most needy members, and the Falcon Stairs man is telling John how the second distribution went at his end. John listens with his usual steady attention. He nods. He touches the brim of his hat again. In the ordinary way a working man of this century says a small thanks to another for a small piece of news. And when his friend has moved on down the lane, he turns back and steps into the booth to check the brazier. The brazier is doing well. The charcoal is glowing under a thin skim of white ash. The kettle is steaming gently at its spout. The children are still asleep against the back wall. His wife is straightening the small cakes on their bowl for the next customer. She looks up as he comes in, and she gives him the small, tired smile of a woman who has been on her feet for a great many hours in a small, warm space, and is glad of 5 minutes. He takes over at the counter for a while so she can sit down. She goes to the back and lifts a folded blanket over the sleeping children, and settles herself for a minute on the edge of a keg, hands turned in front of the brazier, warming. The lantern on the ice at the corner of the booth is dark still, for a little while yet. The next thing is to light it, and to light it, we need first to think about the coach that made all of this possible, the coach and 6 horses that were driven across this ice on the 5th of January for a wager, and passed the test of it, and thereby made a fair. Let us take a small step back in time. Not far. Only 19 days back to the Saturday morning of the 5th of January 1684. We are standing on the same stretch of the frozen river at the foot of the Temple Stairs, but the fair has not yet been built. There are booths at the banks in a scattering. The watermen have begun to pitch a handful of them in the last week of December, but there is no Freezeland Street. There is no printer at his press. There are no coaches on the ice. There is only a broad frozen river between 2 banks, and the cold, pale sky of an early January morning, and a great white plain waiting for someone to try it. The wager is between 2 gentlemen, and we do not know their names. That is very common in this century. Wagers between gentlemen were the small currency of London life, and the newswriters of this month wrote only that a coach and 6 horses was driven across the ice for a wager. One of them believed the ice would hold, the other did not. The stake, they say, was a considerable sum, though the newswriters do not put a figure to it. It might have been 50 guineas. It might have been more. The coachman for the wager is a man employed by one of them. He is a professional, one of the licensed coachmen of the London hackney trade, which has been in existence since about 1625, when the first hackney coaches began plying for hire from Long Acre and the Strand. He is perhaps 30. He has spent his working life on London streets and London roads, and he has never in that life driven a coach onto the frozen face of the Thames. Let us call him William. That is a good coachman's name in this century, common and plain, and it will do for a man whose real name did not survive the newswriter's brevity. William is standing at the horses' heads at the top of the Temple Stairs, dressed in his working coat and a caped greatcoat over it, a stout felt hat pulled low, thick leather gauntlets on his hands. The coach is a heavy 4-wheeled hackney of the ordinary London kind, painted black with red trim, a small brass lantern set at each front corner, curtains at the windows, a seat for the coachman set high in front, and a folding board for a footman at the back. The 6 horses are a scratch team put together for the wager. 2 lead, 2 centre, 2 wheel. All are working horses of the middle sort, bays and 1 grey, of the kind hired to do hard days on London roads. They are already in their harness, blankets over their withers against the cold. Their breath goes ahead of them in soft, steady clouds in the pale morning air. The gentlemen of the wager are standing at the top of the stairs, wrapped in their own furred coats and beaver hats, and a small crowd has gathered around them of the sort that always gathers around a London wager. Watermen from the near stairs, serving men from the Temple, 2 lawyers who came out of their chambers to watch, a knot of apprentices sent by their masters for the errand of watching, a dozen small boys. William takes his time. He walks each horse in turn slowly down the water stairs, one hand on the harness at the head, one hand steadying himself on the wall. It takes a full quarter of an hour to bring all 6 horses down onto the ice. He talks to each of them low as he goes. The horses are steady, the ice takes them without a sound. At the bottom he calls up for the coach. 2 of the strong men of the crowd wheel it down the ramp of straw that has been laid over the stairs for this express purpose, and William hooks the team back in at the head, and then he climbs up onto the driver's seat, and then he pauses. Now he is looking across the river. The far bank at Southwark is perhaps 400 paces away. There is a landmark at the far side, an old wharf post at the top of the Barge House stairs. That is the mark. Between him and it is nothing but flat white ice, dusted with an inch of snow, marked only by the beaten track along the banks and here and there a few small booths already pitched in the last days of December. He gathers his reins. He speaks a word to the lead horses. The team leans into the traces. The coach begins to move. The sound of it on the ice is not what a man expects. On stones or on paved road, a coach and 6 is a great racket, a booming rattle of iron-rimmed wheels and iron-shod hooves. On the ice, it is quieter and stranger. The hooves make a soft, dull knock. The iron rims of the wheels make a smooth, continuous glide. There is no rattle at all because the ice absorbs every jolt. The whole equipage seems to be moving in a hush. The crowd on the bank falls silent. The men are watching for the first crack. William is watching for the first crack too. He is listening below him as well as watching ahead. He knows the sound ice will make when it is about to give. A long, soft groan, a deep note that comes up through the wood of the seat into the small bones of the body. He does not hear it. He does not hear anything at all except his horses breathing and the smooth, continuous whisper of the wheels. He crosses to the middle of the river. The middle is where a coach would break through if a coach were going to. He is now perhaps 200 paces from either bank, in the deepest part of the frozen river, over water that in a wherry would be 4 fathoms and more below him. He does not stop. He drives on at the same easy pace. He speaks to his lead horses again, gently, and they lean a little into the traces. At the far side he brings the team up on the strip of trodden ice near the Barge House stairs, wheels around in a wide slow arc, and starts back. The crowd on the near bank has begun to shout, not in alarm, but in a general encouraging way, and the boys among them are cheering openly. William drives back across at the same easy pace, and this time the small crowd of Southwark watermen and coalmen and small boys on the far bank is also cheering. He reaches the near side. He brings the horses up. The 2 gentlemen come down the temple stairs onto the ice, one of them shaking his head good-humouredly, the other laughing outright. The wager is settled. Money changes hands at the foot of the stairs. William, who's been paid a good day's wage for a good morning's work, touches his hat to both gentlemen and begins the slow business of taking the horses back up the ramp. That is the moment the fair became a possibility. On the 6th, being Sunday, no one did much on the ice out of respect for the Sabbath. On the 7th, being Monday, the watermen began pitching booths in earnest, and by the middle of the following week the fair we are standing in tonight had begun to build itself into the shape we know it by, a lane between 2 rows of tents, a full quarter mile from end to end. That lane is where we're going now, back to our own present of the 24th of January, and down its length from the Temple to the Barge House at Southwark, along Freezeland Street. We are back at the foot of the Temple stairs, in our own present of the 24th of January. The dusk is beginning to gather. The lane between the 2 lines of booths runs away in front of us down the length of the frozen river, and it has a name now. The Londoners of this month have named it Freezeland Street. It is a good name. It is a joke, in a small, quiet Londoner's way, of the kind Londoners have always loved. A made-up county called Freezeland lying just off the Strand and reachable by a short walk down the water stairs, its main street laid down between 2 rows of tented shops for the season only, its inhabitants any Londoner who cared to come out onto the ice. The ballad printers have already picked it up. There is a copper-engraved map for sale in the town this week called A Map of the River Thames, merrily called Blanket Fair, as it was frozen in the memorable year 1683 and 4. The map shows Freezeland Street plainly and gives the fair its 2 names in one breath, the Frost Fair or the Blanket Fair. Let us walk it, end to end. It is about 1/4 of a mile from the Temple Stairs to the Barge House Stairs at Southwark, roughly the same distance as from the Temple to Charing Cross on dry land. That is not a long walk. In an ordinary week we could do it in 5 minutes. Tonight, in the slow crowd pace of a market at its full, we shall take 1/4 of an hour or more, and every stride of it will show us something worth looking at. The lane is perhaps 10 paces across. The 2 rows of booths face each other along it. On our left as we set off, the north side, the row runs by the booths of the drinking trades in the main: ale, mum, beer, sack, French and Spanish wines. On our right, the south side, the row leans a little more toward the food and coffee and the little pleasures: pancakes, hot codlings, gingerbread, coffee, tea, chocolate, ballads, small toys. That is not a rule. It is only a rough pattern. Booths open and close as their keepers can manage, and the rough pattern shifts every day as one booth folds and another rises in its place. Underfoot the ice has been swept clear of snow along the lane and scattered with straw for grip. The straw has been trodden into a soft matted brown pathway, of the sort you might see on the beaten dirt track of a country lane in October. Off the pathway, the ice is white and rough, dusted this morning with a fresh skin of snow. Beyond the booths, on either side, the wider expanse of the river stretches away, empty and gleaming, all the way to the black stone piers of Old London Bridge to the east, and to the water gates of Whitehall to the west. The first booth on our left is John's, the waterman we met a moment ago with his copper kettle of hot-spiced ale. The second is a coffee booth run by a man in the tradition of Pasqua Rosé, the Greek servant who opened the first English coffee house in Cornhill in 1652, and who, though he died young, gave England the first taste of the drink that would occupy so many of the next 200 years of its afternoons. The third on our left is an alehouse of the ordinary sort, a Kentish brew. The fourth is a spit booth turning a joint of beef. On our right, opposite them, the first booth is a small food booth of pancakes and hot codlings. The second is a printer's booth with a wooden hand press visible through its open flap. The third is a small ballad seller's booth, its fresh sheets pegged along the counter. The fourth is another spit booth turning a joint of mutton this time. Past those the lane runs on. There is the music booth, its fiddlers already warming their instruments for the evening. There is a puppet play under a small striped canopy, a farthing at the door. There is a lottery booth, and a booth selling small toys for the children. There is a Kentish cheese booth, and a booth selling apples from a stack of straw-filled barrels. There is a bookseller's booth with 3 shelves of small printed books in leather bindings, and its own tin brazier on the floor to keep them from freezing. Here and there along the lane a hackney coach comes past, slow and quiet on the ice, its coachman calling in a low voice to make his way through the crowd, its brass corner lanterns already lit against the coming dark. The horses' hooves make the same soft, dull knock on the ice that William's did on the 5th. The wheels make the same smooth, continuous glide. At intervals along the lane, at every 5th or 6th booth, a corner post carries a horn lantern already trimmed and ready. Some of them are already lit. A boy is going along the lane now with a small burning taper on a long stick, lighting them one by one from the far end where he began 10 minutes ago. He is a lantern boy, a small trade brought into being for the duration of the fair, and he is one of the small heroes of the coming evening. The lantern he is lighting now is the one at the corner of the printer's booth on our right. It is at about the middle of the lane, and it is one of the fair's most reliable landmarks, because everyone in London knows there is a printer working here who will print your name on a card for sixpence. Above the printer's counter, on the sailcloth wall, someone has pinned a specimen card, a decorative border printed in black, with a space in the middle for a name written in ink or set fresh in type, and along the bottom the words, "Printed on the frozen River Thames, in the reign of King Charles II." We reach the far end of the lane. The last booth on our right, at the Southwark end, is a spit booth roasting a whole side of mutton over quick coals. The last on our left is a small dark tented alehouse of the rougher kind. Beyond them the Barge House stairs come up out of the ice to the marshy Southwark shore. A few small boys are standing at the top of the stairs looking down at us with the open, frank curiosity of Southwark boys of that century. One of them waves. We wave back. The far bank of the river is now a low dark line against the pale grey sky above it. Behind us the north bank is a taller dark line, broken by the tower of the Temple Church and further west by the watergate of Whitehall Palace, its own lamps beginning to show. Between us and either bank runs the flat, gleaming ice, and between the ice and the sky, everywhere along the lane, the horn lanterns of Freezeland Street are being lit one by one. The lantern at the printer's corner is burning bright now. It is where we are going next, back up the lane, to stand at the counter for a while and watch a wooden hand press print the fair's most famous keepsake. But first the boy with the taper still has 15 lanterns to light between us and the north bank, and the whole lane is about to change its light. That is the small warm thing to watch, the lantern hours coming on. Let us stand a little to one side of the lane, out of the crowd's way, and watch the small ceremony that is happening now up and down Freezeland Street. The boy with the taper has been at his round for the best part of half an hour. He began at the Barge House end at the last lantern of the fair, and he has been walking slowly up the lane on the south side, lighting each horn lantern at each booth's corner post, in turn as he comes to it. He is perhaps 11, no taller than the counter of a spit booth. His taper is a slim wooden stick with a small flame at its end, kept alive from booth to booth by his shielding of it with one cupped hand. At each lantern he stops. He unhooks the small horn side of the lantern. He touches the taper to the wick of the candle inside, which is a slim wax candle, not a tallow one, because tallow smokes in a horn lantern and makes the horn dim within an hour. Wax burns clean. The candle catches, and the boy waits for a small moment to be sure it will hold, and then he closes the horn side of the lantern and hooks it back onto its post and moves on. Along the lane behind him, the lanterns are burning. There must be almost 120 of them along the 2 lines of booths at their full extent, though not all are lit every evening, because a booth that has closed for the night takes its lantern with it. Tonight perhaps 90 are burning. Each hangs from an iron hook driven into the sailcloth wall at the corner post at about the height of a man's shoulder. Each casts a small yellow ring of light of perhaps 3 paces across, and the rings overlap along the length of the lane, so that the whole quarter-mile of Freezeland Street is now lit by an unbroken warm ribbon of horn lantern glow, walking along above the trodden straw of the pathway like a lit hem. Between the lanterns the booths themselves glow. Every tented sailcloth wall has a small light coming through it from within, from the candle at the counter and the brazier on the floor, so that each booth appears in the dusk as its own small paper lantern, gently golden. Between the booths, above the smokes, the sky is the pale, thin blue that comes only in the last quarter of a January afternoon, dimming to grey now as the boy with the taper works his way up the lane. There is a second lit company on the ice besides the booth lanterns. The hackney coaches, of which there are between 30 and 40 on the river at this hour, have their brass corner lanterns lit, and each moves along the wider stretches of the ice as a small pair of yellow points in the gathering dark. Each coachman calls low to his horses, and the horses' breath goes ahead of them in soft, steady clouds. And there is a third company. At the water stairs on either bank, small clusters of link boys are gathering. Link boys are the small boys who stand at the top of a stair, with a torch of pitch-soaked hemp on a pole, for hire at a farthing or a halfpenny to light a gentleman or lady from the ice, up the slippery stairs and through the dark alleys of the Strand to the door of a Covent Garden or Cheapside house. They are, in this century, a proper small trade. There is a licence to be had from the parish, and there are one or two well-known link boys of good reputation, whom a returning fair-goer will look for by name. At the top of the Temple stairs at this moment, 4 link boys are standing in a loose knot with their torches unlit as yet, waiting for full dark. Let us call the smallest of them Tom, aged 9, an orphan of St. Bride's parish. He is a wiry small boy with a sharp face and a set of good, clear brown eyes. He has been out on the water stairs every evening since the fair began, and he has more than doubled his winter's pennies as a consequence. He has a mother he does not remember, an older sister in service on the Strand who takes his pennies each Sunday and keeps them safe for him, and he has learned to say polite good evenings to gentlemen and gentlewomen with the practised ease of a boy in a good trade. The lantern on the ice at the corner of the printer's booth, back up the lane, is burning bright. The boy with the taper has come almost as far as it on his round. He touches the taper to the wick, closes the horn, hooks the lantern back. He is at about the middle of the lane now, and he has 50 more lanterns to light before he is done, and if we stayed with him we could watch the last ring of light fall behind him at the top of the north bank in about a quarter of an hour more. But we shall let him do his round in peace. His work is his work. The lane he leaves behind him is the lane we shall walk together for the rest of the night, and the lantern on the ice at the corner of the printer's booth is where we are going, to stand at the counter and watch a keepsake take its shape. Let us stand for a good while at the printer's booth. It is one of the 2 or 3 most memorable things in the whole fair, and it is one of the 2 or 3 that will be spoken of for 100 years after this evening is over. The printer is a man of about 40, a Londoner of the ordinary respectable sort, a member of the Stationers' Company, a man with a small permanent shop on Fleet Street 2 streets from the north bank of the river, who has moved his lightest press and 1 apprentice down onto the ice for the season. His name is G. Croom. That is how he signs the card he will print tonight for the King and the Queen, and it is how the historians of the next century will name him. He is a tradesman working in the trade of the moment, and he is doing better business than he has ever done in his life. His booth is a little larger than the ale booths at either side of it. It has to be, to hold the press. The press is a wooden hand press of the London kind, about 4 feet across at the base and about 6 feet tall at the top. It has a heavy screw at the top for pressing down on the bed, worked by a wooden lever. It has a bed of iron on which the type is set inside a chase. It has a sliding timpan and frisket, on which the paper is laid before being run under the platen. It has an ink block on a stand beside it, on which the printer's boy rolls out the ink with 2 ink balls, small leather cushions on wooden handles. It is a machine of great and characteristic beauty, in the shape of every wooden hand press of every printer of this century, and its very shape is one of the memorable things of the booth. The printer works standing. He has a leather apron over a plain wool waistcoat and shirt, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, his forearms speckled with the small dark spots of ink that no printer's forearms are ever without. His hands are the same. He has that particular grave, attentive expression of a man doing a task he has done 1,000 times, and who yet does it now with all his attention, because a good keepsake is a good keepsake, and a bad one is a shame on the trade. The trade at this moment is a small polite line of Londoners waiting at the counter for their turn. A young gentleman with a lady on his arm is next. He hands over 6pence and gives his name and hers, and gives the printer's boy a good pronunciation of each. The boy repeats the names back to be sure. The gentleman confirms them. The boy, aged perhaps 14, goes to the case of type on the shelf and quickly assembles the 2 names in a small composing stick. He has done this many times today. He works fast, sliding letter by letter into the stick with the tail of a finger, upside down and back to front in the practised way of a compositor. He locks the stick, transfers the type into a small chase already prepared with the fair's standard border, and the fair's standard motto, printed on the frozen River Thames in the reign of King Charles II, in the memorable year 1683 and 4, and hands the chase to Croom. Croom sets the chase into the bed of the press. He turns the ink balls out on the ink block, one in each hand, and beats them briskly against the type to work the ink into it evenly. He lays a small square of good paper on the timpan. He folds the frisket down over it. He slides the timpan under the platen. He works the lever. The screw drives down. The platen presses the paper into the inked type for one moment, one small measured moment, and then Croom releases the lever, slides the timpan back out, opens the frisket, and lifts off the printed card. The whole business takes perhaps 30 seconds. The card is handed across the counter to the gentleman, still faintly damp with ink, printed with a decorative border, and in the centre the two names, and the date, and the fair. The gentleman looks at it. The lady looks at it. They both smile a little. They fold the card in tissue and slip it inside a leather pocket-book to dry safely on the way home. They wish Croom a good evening. They step aside to let the next customer come up. The next customer is a Londoner of the middling sort, a woman of perhaps 50 in a good wool cloak with her grown daughter beside her. Sixpence changes hands. Two more names go into the composing stick. Croom prints them in his measured 30 seconds. The mother's face when she takes the card is a small unguarded pleasure, and her daughter says something soft and fond that we do not hear. At the counter tonight, in the course of the evening, Croom will print perhaps 120 of these cards, one after another at his measured pace of 2 a minute at full speed, less at his real average. That is 120 impressions per hour, roughly what any good wooden hand press of this century could turn out in the hands of a good pressman with a good boy at the ink and the type. At sixpence a card he's bringing in something like 60 shillings an hour, or £3, and by the end of the day, at 10 or 12 hours running, John Evelyn will estimate that this printer alone has taken £5. £5 a day is roughly the yearly wage of a labourer in this century, and Croom is taking it at one printer's booth, at sixpence a name for setting a line of type. That is the mathematics of the fair's most famous small trade, and it is the mathematics of the fair's most famous keepsake. He does not, of course, keep it all. He pays his boy well. He pays his premium for the booth. He pays for his paper and his ink, both of which are set at a small London premium this month, because the coasting coal ships that ordinarily bring good paper down from the continent are hindered by the frozen sea, and a fair share of his take goes into the poor box he keeps on the counter, which he empties into the Company of Stationers' Widows' Fund at the end of each week. Between customers, Croom lays the ink balls on the block, wipes his forearms on his apron, and warms his hands over the small tin brazier on the floor of the booth. His boy warms the next tray of type on a piece of cloth laid over another small brazier at the back, so that the metal will not sting the fingers when he goes to set it. The lantern at the corner post burns steadily above them. Ink and lantern light together are the two smells of the booth. Sharp new ink, warm wax candle, warm charcoal, warm paper. The king himself, we shall find, will come to this same press within the week. Charles II walks the fair on the 31st of January, and he takes away a printed card, and that card survives, folded carefully in tissue in the Museum of London, 342 winters later. And that is where we are going next, up the lane, to be standing at Croom's counter on the evening the king and his family come down onto the ice. Let us stay at the printer's booth, but let us step gently 7 days forward. It is the evening of the 31st of January, 1684, at about 6 in the evening, in the middle hour of a great cold, clear London night. The fair is at its full. Freezeland Street is packed. Every horn lantern along its length is lit. Every booth is open. The music booth is running a set of country tunes. The Rotterdam skater is drawing a great ring of watchers at the wider stretch of ice near the middle of the river. The coffee man is doing steady business. Croom's press is going at its measured pace of 2 cards a minute. Down at the north bank, at the watergate of the Whitehall Palace, a small party is coming down the stairs. It is a party of the household, perhaps 20 in number. The king himself, his queen, Catherine of Braganza, his brother James, Duke of York, heir to the throne, James's second wife, Mary of Modena, their niece the Princess Anne, aged 18, 2 or 3 gentlemen of the king's bedchamber, a small guard of the lifeguards in their red coats with their carbines slung. The lifeguards go first, in the ordinary way of a royal party moving in a public place. The king and the queen come next, walking arm in arm on the ice, at the same slow crowd pace as everyone else. The Duke of York and the Duchess follow, and the Princess Anne behind them with her own gentleman in waiting. The Londoners on the ice hear them before they see them. That is the ordinary way in this century of any royal party in public. The small ripple of hats being taken off ahead, spreading up the lane the way a wave spreads through standing water. Boothkeepers step out of their booths to bow. Coachmen bring their horses to a slow halt. The music booth's fiddlers keep playing, but they play softer. The Dutchman on his skates makes one graceful final turn and stops. The whole fair does not exactly stop, but it eases into a warmer and more attentive rhythm, and hats come off up and down the lane in a slow, moving hush. Charles II is 53 this winter. He's a tall man, more than 6 feet, with the very dark hair and long dark face of his Portuguese and French inheritance. He's a warm-hearted man in his ordinary dealings with people, and Londoners have known him now for 23 years since his return to his throne in 1660, and he has a small standing warmth of his own with them that has to do with theatre, and with coffee-houses, and with a general disinclination to stand on ceremony in a public place. He carries a stick in his right hand for the ice. He has his other hand tucked into the Queen's arm. The Queen, Catherine, is 45. She has been on the throne beside him for 22 years. She's a small pious woman in a fur-trimmed cloak and a fur hat, with the very calm, quiet manner of a queen who has known both great sorrow and great affection in her time. She smiles a small warm smile as she walks. She does not say much. She takes in the fair with the attention of a woman who has never seen its like. The Duke of York, James, is 50. He is a serious man, in a plain dark coat and a heavy fur cloak, with a very straight bearing. Mary of Modena, his wife, is 25, dark-eyed, in a black velvet cloak lined with sable, with the beauty of her family. The Princess Anne is 18, plumper than her cousins, plain in her manner, with a shy, warm smile. The party comes up Freezeland Street from the Whitehall end. They pause at the music booth. The fiddlers, seeing them coming, have begun a small quiet air the king is known to like, an old tune of the court from the years before the war. He smiles at hearing it, and he stands for a moment listening. He drops a small purse into the boy's cap. The music booth's boy, a boy of about 12, blushes to the top of his ears and does not know quite what to do. At the printer's booth, Croom is waiting. He knows the party is coming. Word has been ahead of them along the lane. He has laid out a fresh chase with the fair's standard border, and his boy has set fresh type into a composing stick, and he has the paper ready on the timpan. The king steps up to the counter. He greets Croom warmly. He asks Croom his name. Croom gives it. The king says a small good-humoured thing about a printer's forearms, which we shall not try to reconstruct, and Croom laughs the polite small laugh of a tradesman greeting his sovereign. The king then says the 5 names he wants set: his own, the Queen's, the Duke of York's, the Duchess of York's, and the Princess Anne's. Croom's boy at the counter listens carefully. The 5 names go into the composing stick. The king and the queen stand at the counter watching. Charles is enjoying this. He has always liked small trades done well. He watches the boy set the type upside down and back to front, and he says something quiet to Catherine about how he cannot read a word of it, which is true. She smiles. Croom locks the type into the chase. He beats the ink. He lays the paper, He works the lever. The screw drives down, the platen presses. He lifts off the card and hands it, still faintly damp with ink, across the counter to the king. The king reads it aloud in a warm, quiet voice. His own name, his queen's, his brother's, his sister-in-law's, his niece's, and along the bottom the words, printed on the frozen River Thames, in the reign of King Charles II, in the memorable year 1683 and 4. He hands the card to the Queen. She holds it in her mittened hands for a moment. He fishes a shilling out of his pocket and lays it on the counter for the sixpence of the card, and he waves off the change. The party moves on down the lane. Croom stands at the counter for a long moment afterwards, and his boy stands beside him, and neither of them says anything. Then Croom lets out a small breath he did not know he was holding, and he goes to the small tin brazier and warms his hands over it. His boy leans against the counter and grins a very small, unguarded grin. That card survives. It is folded now in a tissue paper wrapper in a drawer of the Museum of London, 342 winters later, and it is one of the few surviving physical objects of the 1684 Frost Fair. On its face are the 5 names, and the fair, and the year. On its back are the small, faint press marks of a fair long since gone. In one of the small tender ironies of history, the king who took it away with him will die within 13 months, and his brother will succeed him, and will lose the throne within 4 years, and none of them ever came down to the ice again. But on this particular evening they walked Freezeland Street together, and took away a printed card, and the light of the lantern on the ice at Croom's corner is the light they walked under. The £2,000 of the King's Poor Fund is where we are going next, back a week, to the 23rd of January, when the King launched a public collection with a personal gift of his own money for the poor of London. Let us step gently another 8 days back in time to the evening of the 23rd of January 1684. We are still on the ice at the foot of the Temple stairs in the middle of the fair, but the news that arrives this evening will change the mood of the fair for the better in one small important way, and we ought to stay with it a little. The news that arrives is that Charles II, this morning, has ordered a public collection for the relief of the poor of London and the neighbouring counties, who are suffering great hardship because of the scarcity and expense of food and fuel in the frost, and that he has given himself, as the first contribution and as an example to others, the sum of £2,000. £2,000 is a great deal of money in this century. To give it a small honest sense, we may say what an ordinary Londoner's wage is. A skilled tradesman, a joiner or a mason, might earn 2 shillings a day, 12 pennies to a shilling. A labourer perhaps a shilling. £2,000 is 40,000 shillings, or the yearly wages of about 200 labourers, or the yearly wages of about 100 skilled tradesmen. It is not the king's private fortune. It is a very substantial slice of the private purse of a king who is famously short of ready cash. And he has laid it down first, on his own head, so that every other man of means in London who reads the newswriters this evening will feel a small good pressure to give in his own proportion. The news reaches Freezeland Street by way of the newswriters. There are perhaps a dozen private newswriters in London this month, men who make their living sending manuscript newsletters out to country gentlemen and to provincial towns for a small annual subscription. One of the best known is a writer employed by Sir Richard Newdgate, the country gentleman at Arbury Hall in Warwickshire. His name is not preserved, but his letters are, and they are one of the 2 best minute-by-minute records of the fair, the other being John Evelyn's diary. This afternoon he's at his ordinary Fleet Street table with his quill, and he is writing out the news of the day for tomorrow's post to Warwickshire, and the King's £2,000 is his opening sentence. The other diarist we have to hand is Narcissus Luttrell. He is a young lawyer, aged 27 this winter, who has begun a diary of his own 3 years ago, a modest daily record of London public news. He will keep this diary for the next 31 years, and it will become one of the most valuable of all sources for late 17th century London life. Tonight, at his desk in his lodgings, he sets down what he has heard. He gave himself £200, as is said, for an example, and large contributions were made by divers persons. £200 is his period way of saying 2,000. The mood on the ice this evening warms a little. Not because the fair goers all know the news, though many of them do, but because the news travels along the lane from booth to booth in the small, ordinary way of news at a fair, and by 7 o'clock this evening most of the booth-keepers know the sum. Booth-keepers are not, on the whole, people who have any great expectation of a fund reaching them personally. They have work this month, and they are managing, but they have brothers and cousins and neighbours who have not, and they hear the news and they pass it on, and the ale flows a little easier at the counter for it. The king has done a decent kingly thing. 3 days later, on the 26th of January, the company of watermen and lightermen, following the king's example, will vote a distribution of £200 from their own funds among the poor watermen and widows of the trade. £200 is not 2,000, but for the company it is a very substantial slice of the year's reserves, and it is the second decent public act of the fair. Both together are the reason the fair on the ice, of all the fairs of English history, is remembered not only for its wonder, but for its kindness. At the ale booth of John and his wife, the news reaches them a little after 7 this evening from a passing customer. John's wife hears it. She stops for a moment. She turns from the brazier and says something quiet to her husband, and he nods slowly, and both of them stand for a moment looking at each other in the small, quiet way of two people receiving a small piece of news that will make a difference in a household they know but is not their own. John's wife has a sister in Wapping, whose husband was a lighterman and drowned 3 years ago, and who has kept herself and her 3 small children in a room in a court off Ratcliffe Highway with the help of the company's Widows' Fund and with linens taken in for washing. If the £200 of the company distribution reaches her, it will keep her rent paid for 6 months. If it does not, she will manage. Either way, the news is a small good news. John lays a hand on his wife's shoulder for a moment, and she puts hers over his, and they both turn back to their work. That is the kind of small, warm effect a great sum of money has when it is announced at a fair. It reaches in small ways the sisters and cousins and neighbours of the booth-keepers who hear it. It does not reach everyone. But it does what a first announcement is supposed to do, which is to say aloud in a public voice that the poor of this city are known to be in trouble and are not to be forgotten. That is not nothing. That is a great deal, in fact, in a January of this century. The fund and the collections that follow will be distributed through the parishes of London and the surrounding counties over the course of the coming weeks. It will pay for coal for widows, it will pay for bread for orphans, it will pay for the burial of the poor in a February when the graveyard earth of St. Bride's, according to a newswriter of the season, has had to be broken with a cold chisel because it is frozen too hard for a spade. And now the news moves on down the lane. It is the ordinary business of a fair to talk about what the day has brought. And what the day has brought tonight is the news that the king has laid down £2,000 for the poor. That is the fair's warmth of the evening, and there are about 40 coaches gliding slowly along the wider stretches of the ice as the news travels among them, and it is those coaches that we shall look at next. Let us step out of the lane of booths for a while and look across the wider stretches of the ice, where the coaches are plying. Freezeland Street is where the crowd is. The coaches are where the space is. Off the ends of the lane, and along either side of it beyond the booths, the wider expanse of frozen river opens out, 400 paces or so from bank to bank, empty enough for wheeled traffic to move properly. And it is over these wider stretches that the hackneys of London have taken up business on the ice. By late January there are about 40 coaches operating on the river daily. That is the figure the newswriter to Sir Richard Newdegate reports in his letter of the 31st, and it is the figure the historians of the fair have used ever since. 40 is not a huge number by London standards, but it is a very great number by frozen river standards, and it makes the ice of the Thames in this month one of the busiest coach routes in the whole city. The route is roughly this. The main stand of coaches is at Westminster Stairs, at the west end of the fair, where a party stepping off the water stairs onto the ice can pick up a hackney for £1 to be driven the length of the fair to the Temple Stairs at the East End. That is the ordinary short route, and it is very heavily used by fair-goers who do not want to walk the length of the lane in bad weather. Beyond the Temple, another set of coaches ply eastwards toward the Custom House stairs, though not all the way through the arches of the bridge, because the ice at the bridge itself is not smooth. Westwards, beyond Westminster, a second route runs up river to Lambeth Stairs and beyond that to Vauxhall. That is a longer route, 3/4 of an hour there and back at a coach's ice pace, and the fare is a little higher. Let us stand for a while at the Westminster stand and watch. It is a wide stretch of ice about 100 paces off the northern bank at the foot of the water stairs. A short line of coaches is waiting there in an easy rank, each with its 2 brass corner lanterns lit, each with its coachman on the box in his caped greatcoat and stout felt hat, each with its horses standing quietly with their breath going ahead of them in soft clouds. A boy in a blue coat, employed by the ordinary and formal arrangements of the London hackney trade, is at the head of the line, calling out fares to arriving passengers and directing them to the next coach in the rank. The coachman we shall stand near is a man of perhaps 40. Let us call him William, for the sake of the story, though again the news writers did not preserve any coachman's name from this month. He is a Fleet Street man by ordinary trade, one of a large fraternity of hackneymen who have their yard off Chancery Lane, and he has been driving on the ice since the 10th of January. He has learned the ice quickly. He knows now the 2 or 3 places where a small puddle of water may still be present at low tide under the ice, and he knows the length of stretch he can trot the horses safely at, and he knows the tighter length at which he must slow them to a walk. His horses are 2, not 6. This is a hackney, not a wager coach, and 2 is the ordinary team of a London hackney. They are a pair of bays, one of them a mare of about 10 years old, the other a gelding a year older. They have worked the London streets for the better part of a decade. They have not particularly minded the change from cobbles to ice. Horses adapt. What they mind is standing too long in the cold, and the boy at the rank keeps them moving in a slow walking circle when they have been standing for more than 5 minutes. A party of 3 comes down the Westminster stairs onto the ice. 2 gentlemen and a lady, well wrapped against the cold. They pay the boy for the fare to the Temple, £1 for the 3 of them together, which is the standard fare for the short route on the ice this month. The boy waves them to William's coach. They climb in. William turns his horses out of the rank and lets them lean into the traces. The sound of the coach on the ice is the same soft dull knock of hooves and the smooth continuous glide of wheels that we heard on the 5th of January with the coach and 6. It is the sound the whole fair is walking to if we notice it. Below the murmur of the crowd, below the fiddles from the music booth, below the calling of the ballad singers, is the steady soft glide of iron-rimmed wheels on ice, and the steady soft knock of iron-shod hooves. It is one of the fair's warmest sounds, once you are listening for it. William drives the horses at a slow trot down the length of the fair, keeping well outside the lane of booths. The 3 passengers inside watch the fair go past through the coach windows, the golden glow of the tented booths, the horn lanterns along the corner posts, the small figures of the fairgoers moving in and out of the lane. Every so often they say something to each other in the small easy way of people who have been out in the cold and are now warm and settled inside a moving room. At the Temple end, William brings the horses up. The 3 passengers step out. The gentlemen tip him a 3-penny piece over the fare. He touches the brim of his hat. He turns the coach out in a wide, slow arc and starts back to the Westminster rank for another fare. There is one other kind of vehicle on the ice worth mentioning, and it is a strange one. The newswriter to Sir Richard Newdigate mentions it in the same letter of the 31st. A kind of sledge chair, which people, which skate, drive before them at a great rate. That is not a coach. It is a small light chair set on wooden runners, in which a passenger sits, propelled by a friend on iron skates who pushes the chair from behind and steers with a long pole. It is a new thing on the ice, brought in from Holland this year by fashionable young men. 2 or 3 of them are running up and down the wider stretches of the ice at any given hour, at a considerable pace, laughing. They are in a small way the ancestors of every kind of ice sport that will come to England later. The Rotterdam skater at the middle of the fair is another. Between them, they are the beginning of Dutch ice practice becoming an English pleasure. It will take another century and a half, but the seed of skating clubs and figure skating and speed skating in England is being laid on this ice this month. The Dutchman on his skates and the trained band drilling on the ice are where we are going next. Let us step gently 3 days back in time to the morning of the 26th of January 1684. It is a bright, cold Saturday morning at the fair. The lanterns are unlit because it is broad day. The booths are open. The lane is busy in the ordinary market way. And down at the eastern end of the fair, at the ice near the 3 Crowns Tavern, a small crowd is gathering. The 3 Crowns is a tavern on the north bank of the river, at a stretch of stair called the 3 Crown Stairs, which lies between the Temple and the Custom House, in an ordinary crowded stretch of the London waterfront. It is not a particularly famous tavern. It is a plain place of the middling sort, kept by a Sussex man, patronised by the small tradesmen and Thames watermen of the neighbourhood. It stands at the top of a stone stair that comes down to the ice, and it is the eastern anchor of the fair. The crowd that has gathered at the ice this morning is a good-humoured crowd of London gentry and tradesmen and their sons, perhaps 150 in number, come to see a thing that will not happen twice in a lifetime. A company of the London trained bands, mustered in full, drilling on the frozen face of the Thames. The trained bands of London are the city's own militia. They have existed in one form or another since the reign of Henry VIII. They are drawn from the freemen of the city, exercised on public holidays and on Wednesdays in Moorfields, and mustered when a public emergency requires. They are proud companies. They have their own colours, their own drummers, their own officers, and their own good long tradition of London civic service. The company that is mustering this morning is one of the 6 regular companies of the city. Its captain is a man named Edwards. We do not know his Christian name, but the news writers of this week name him plainly as Captain Edwards. He is a man of about 50, a mercer by trade, one of the good sort of London tradesmen who have taken the trained band commission seriously all his adult life. His company is 100 men strong, dressed in the ordinary red coats and buff breeches of the trained bands, each man carrying a musket and a bandolier. The company forms up on the ice at the 3 Crown Stairs, in 3 ranks, in the space of a few minutes, with the practised orderliness of men who have done this many hundreds of times on the parade ground of Moorfields. The drummer, a boy of 17 with a plain wooden drum on a leather strap, stands at the front. Edwards himself stands at the right-hand end of the front rank, in a plain scarlet coat with the officer's silk sash over one shoulder. He gives the command to shoulder muskets. 100 muskets come up onto shoulders at the same instant in the small, heavy, simultaneous motion of a well-drilled company. He gives the command to advance. The drummer strikes up the slow parade beat. The company begins to march, 3 ranks abreast, along the ice. The route is from the 3 Crown Stairs westward along the frozen river to the Temple Stairs, roughly the distance of the fair itself, about 1/4 of a mile. They march at the slow parade pace, which is about 3 miles an hour, and the whole march takes them perhaps 6 or 7 minutes. It is a great sight. 100 red coats moving in 3 ranks down the middle of a frozen river, muskets shouldered, drum beating steady, the boots of the men making a rhythmic soft dull knock on the ice that carries very cleanly in the cold morning air. The crowd on the banks watches. The booth-keepers of the fair, up the lane, stop what they are doing for a minute to watch. The hackney coachmen on the wider stretches of ice bring their horses to a slow halt so as not to interfere. The ballad singers at the corners of the booths stop singing. For a moment the whole fair is quiet, and the only sound on the frozen face of the river is a drum and 100 marching men. At the Temple Stairs, Captain Edwards brings the company to a halt. He orders the muskets grounded. The men stand at ease. There is a small warm cheer from the crowd on the banks. A few boys wave their hats. A woman in a good wool cloak up on the water stairs raises a small handkerchief in salute. Then the company forms up again and marches back. The drummer strikes up the same slow parade beat. The three ranks turn about smartly on the ice, without any awkwardness, and set off eastwards. Back down the length of the fair they go, at the same slow parade pace, back to the 3 Crown stairs where they began. At the 3 Crowns, Edwards dismisses the company. The men break ranks. There is a small, easy warmth of manner as they do so, in the way of men who have just done a piece of public work well and know it. The drummer, the 17-year-old boy, is grinning openly, and one of the older privates gives him a friendly cuff on the shoulder. Someone hands him a hot cup of ale from a booth. The whole company disperses up the 3 Crown stairs and back into the ordinary streets of Fleet Street and Fetter Lane, back to their weekday trades, back to their ordinary Saturday. Captain Edwards himself stays for a while at the top of the stair, in the small warm circle of the tavern's forecourt lamp, exchanging a good-humoured word or two with a couple of his sergeants and one of the gentlemen of the crowd. He touches his hat to the ladies. He compliments the drummer boy on his timekeeping. He goes home eventually to his own house behind his mercer's shop in the city, where his wife has a good coal fire waiting for him in the parlour, and where his supper of a roast beef and a glass of good sack is on the table. The march on the ice will be talked about in the London taverns for a fortnight. It will be talked of in a print or two of the season. It will be one of the small warm things Londoners of this generation will tell their grandchildren about at fireside 60 years from now, in the reign of the second George. How they saw the trained bands of the city march on the ice of the Thames in the great frost of King Charles's time, and how the drummer boy kept his beat as steady as a clock across the whole quarter-mile of it. The supper hour is coming on now at the fair. The lantern on the ice at the printer's corner is being trimmed. The spit booths are turning their joints, and the smell of roasting beef is beginning to drift down the lane. That is where we are going next. Let us stand for a while at one of the spit booths on Freezeland Street. There are 4 of them along the length of the lane at this hour, and this one is the largest of them, at about the middle of the fair, on the south side, opposite the printer's booth. The booth-keeper is a stout man of about 50 in a leather apron and a good linen shirt, with the strong forearms of a lifelong cook. He is a Fleet Street man by trade, who keeps a small chop-house at the top of Bride Lane in ordinary times, and who has moved his lightest spit and one of his sons and one apprentice boy down onto the ice for the season. His name we do not know. His son, a young man of about 22, does the carving at the counter. His apprentice boy, a boy of about 11, does the turning of the spit. Let us call the boy Ned. He's a Southwark boy, apprenticed to the master at 9, whose people are lightermen of the ordinary bankside sort. He's a slim, quick boy with brown hair that curls at his forehead from the heat of the spit. He wears a leather apron over his shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and thick wool leggings under his breeches and stout leather shoes. The spit itself is a long iron rod of about the length of a man's arm, threaded lengthwise through the middle of a great side of beef. The beef weighs perhaps 20 pounds. It has been cooking for the better part of 5 hours, slowly, over the pit of glowing charcoal that fills the centre of the booth's floor beneath it. The pit is a low ring of fire brick laid over a bed of sand on the wooden floorboards, so that no heat reaches the ice beneath, and the pit is filled to the depth of about 3 inches with quick-burning charcoal, its surface white with ash, its inside glowing orange. Ned turns the spit by a small wooden handle at one end. He turns it slowly, at about 1 turn every 5 seconds, which is the ordinary rate for a good side of beef over quick coals. The turning is the whole art of the spit. Too slow and one side burns while the other cools. Too fast and the meat does not develop the good crackling crust that a well-roasted joint should have. Ned has been turning the spit for the last hour, taking over from his master's son, who took over from the master himself in the middle of the afternoon. The 3 of them share the work in shifts of an hour or so, because the heat of the spit at close range is very great, and no man's arm can turn it for longer than that without cramping. Below the spit, in the pit, a shallow tin dripping pan catches the fat as it falls. The pan is refreshed every quarter hour or so by Ned's other hand, who empties the caught fat into a small iron kettle and slides the pan back into place. The dripping is one of the small treasures of the booth. It will be sold at the counter in small paper twists at a penny an ounce, for spreading on bread and for basting a joint at home, and it will be one of the small warm smells of the booth all evening. The counter of the booth is a plank of wood laid across 2 barrels, and on it stands a good long carving knife with a bone handle, a long 2-tined carving fork, a wooden board scored deeply with a decade of daily use, a stack of small wooden trenchers, and a small pewter jug of salt. The master's son stands at the counter with the knife and fork, and when a customer steps up he cuts a slice of the roast off the spit, lays it on a wooden trencher, sprinkles a small pinch of salt over it, and hands it across the counter for 2p or 3p, depending on the size of the slice. The customers come steadily. It is now about 5:30 in the evening. The supper hour is coming on. A gentleman and his lady step up first for a slice apiece. 2p a slice, 3p for the large one the gentleman asks for. A working man of the middling sort comes next, a good full slice for 3p. A knot of 3 apprentices come after him, 3-penny slices among them, 1 for each. A small, quiet, elderly man with a walking stick asks for the smallest slice on the fork, and takes it at a penny halfpenny, and blesses the master's son as he goes. The smell of the booth is one of the fair's warmer smells. It is the smell of hot beef fat rendering slowly over quick coals, mingled with the smell of the charcoal itself, and with the smaller warmer smell of the good linen bread that stands in a wicker basket at the corner of the counter. A slice of beef on a small hunk of bread sprinkled with salt from the pewter jug is what a good many of the fair-goers of this evening will remember tomorrow as the small warm supper of their frost-fair visit. Ned turns the spit steadily. His face is the ruddy pink of a boy who has been standing over glowing charcoal for an hour, and the small curls at his forehead are damp. He is not tired. Not yet. He will be tired in a little while when his hour is up and his master takes over, and then he will get his own supper of a good full slice from the far end of the joint, and a small hunk of the good linen bread, and a mug of the small ale the booth keeps on the counter for its own people. But for now he turns the handle. He watches the coals. He listens to the small hissing of the fat falling into the tin pan below. The master's son cuts another slice, and another, and another. The joint of beef, over the course of the evening, will feed perhaps 250 Londoners a slice each. When the last slice is off, at about 10 this evening, the master will lift the empty spit off the fire and lay it on the counter for cleaning, and Ned will sweep up the small pile of straw at the base of the spit where the crumbs have gathered, and one of the small warm supper booths of Freezeland Street will fold down for the night. Meanwhile, down the lane, the pancakes and the hot codlings are beginning to come off another griddle, and their own small warm sweet smell is beginning to drift back toward us on the small cold breeze that runs upriver between the booths. And that is where we're going next. Let us move a little way down the lane to the pancake booth. It is a small warm booth kept by a woman of about 40, whom we shall call Bess, a Wapping wife with a good clear voice, and a broad friendly face, and a linen head cloth wound in the ordinary Cheapside fashion. Her booth is a small square of tented sailcloth, not one of the largest, one of the very neat ones. Her counter is a plank laid across 2 barrels, exactly like the spit booths, and above the counter she has hung a small hand-painted wooden sign that reads, in careful uneven letters, "Hot pancakes and hot codlings." Below the counter, on the pit of charcoal, sits a small round iron griddle of the sort every English kitchen of this century keeps for pancakes and drop scones and small cakes. Bess makes the pancakes at the counter, in front of her customers. The batter is in a wooden bowl beside her, A good rich batter of wheat flour and eggs and milk and a small pinch of salt mixed at midday and rested since. She pours the batter onto the hot griddle with a wooden ladle, a small round pool of about the width of a saucer, and she cooks it slowly, watching for the small bubbles to come up all over the surface, and then she flips it with a thin wooden spatula. In a moment the second side is done. She lifts the pancake off the griddle onto a warm wooden trencher, folds a small pat of butter into its middle, sprinkles a little sugar over it, and hands the trencher across the counter for a penny. The customer for this pancake is a small girl of about 7, whose mother is standing beside her holding her hand. The mother has paid the penny out of her purse. The girl takes the trencher in her 2 small mittened hands, the pancake steaming faintly in the cold air, and she looks up at her mother with the quiet, grave joy of a small child receiving a great treat. Her mother nods. She takes a small, careful bite. The butter is melted through it. The sugar has begun to dissolve in the heat. She chews slowly. It is possibly the best thing she has ever eaten. Her mother's small smile as she watches is one of the small warm things of this evening in the fair. Bess pours another pool of batter onto the griddle and starts another pancake. The next customer is a working man of the ordinary sort, in a good broadcloth coat, who has been walking the lane for the last hour and has finally decided to have his supper. He asks for 2 pancakes, one after the other. Bess makes them for him. He eats the first standing at the counter and the second walking on. He tips her a halfpenny. At the far end of Bess's counter, in a small tin pan set at the edge of the charcoal pit, 6 small hot codlings are simmering slowly in a warm spiced ale. Codlings are small hard cooking apples of the sort every English kitchen garden of this century grows in autumn. Sharp, crisp, meant for cooking, of the varieties called codling and nonpareil and winter pearmain. Bess has taken them from her own kitchen larder at home in Wapping, apples she picked in October with her boys and stored in straw in a shed, and she has stewed them here in spiced ale. A little cinnamon, a little clove, a little nutmeg, a little sugar for the last hour, so that they are soft through and warm and steeped with the good spiced ale flavour. She lifts a codling out of the pan with a wooden spoon, sets it on a small trencher, ladles a small spoonful of the spiced ale over it, and hands it across the counter for a penny. The customer for this codling is an elderly woman in a good wool cloak with a fur trim, who takes it in both her mittened hands and stands at the counter, eating it with a small wooden spoon, blowing gently on each hot spoonful before she takes it, and closing her eyes for a moment at the warmth of it going down. She has come out with her son to see the fair, and the son is at the printer's booth up the lane getting a card for the 2 of them. She will eat the codling at the counter and stand waiting for him, and when he comes back she will show him the empty trencher with a small warm smile. On the small shelf behind Bess's counter, in a lidded wooden box, is a stack of thin wedges of gingerbread. This is not gingerbread of the modern loaf kind. This is a hard, flat wedge of a spiced flat cake, made with rye flour and honey and ground ginger and pepper, of a recipe that has been in English kitchens for 4 centuries. It is cut in wedges of about the size of a boy's palm, and it is sold at a halfpenny a wedge for the small quick sweetening of a customer's evening. The gingerbread wedges are Bess's mother's recipe. Her mother, who died 6 winters ago, kept a small cake booth at Southwark Fair every September of her adult life, and Bess grew up beside that booth. The wedges she's selling tonight are the same wedges she watched her mother sell to Southwark boys in the autumn afternoons of her childhood. She thinks about that as she wraps a wedge in a small square of paper for a boy of 10 who has laid a halfpenny on the counter. She hands the wedge across. The boy runs off with it up the lane. The brazier under Bess's griddle is doing well. The charcoal is glowing steady. The kettle of spiced ale beside it is holding its warm. The stack of gingerbread wedges is thinning slowly. The pancakes are coming off the griddle at the steady rate of about 1 every 3 minutes. Bess herself is standing at the counter in the warm ring of her own booth's light, doing the small warm work of feeding a small London crowd through the supper hour, and her face is the calm settled face of a woman who has done this small warm work all her life and is at ease in it. The coffee booth 2 booths further down the lane is where we are going next, for the new drinks of this century. which have never been drunk in England on a frozen river before this month, and which will be drunk in every corner of this country for the next 350 years. Let us move 2 booths down the lane, past a small alehouse and a small ballad seller's booth, to the coffee booth of the fair. The coffee booth is one of only 2 on Freezeland Street. Coffee is still a new drink in England. It has been in this country for exactly 32 years. The first English coffee house was opened at St Michael's Alley off Cornhill, in the city in 1652, by a Greek servant called Pasqua Rosé, in the service of a Turkey merchant who had brought the taste back from the eastern Mediterranean. Pasqua Rosé died young, but his coffee house prospered, and it spread. By this month there are more than 500 coffee houses in London, and coffee has become one of the ordinary morning drinks of the London middle classes. The coffee man at this booth is a man of about 35, of the tradition of Pasqua Rosé's, a small, dark, quiet man with a good, careful manner and a plain white apron over a plain dark coat. His booth is a little larger than Bess's pancake booth, because the coffee trade requires more equipment. On the small brazier at the centre of the floor stands a copper coffee pot of the ordinary long-spouted London pattern. Beside it, on the counter, stands a small wooden coffee mill for grinding the beans fresh. Beside that stands a small tin kettle for water. Beside that stands a small stack of pot cups, thick unglazed brown clay cups of the sort every coffee house in England of this year serves its coffee in, of a shape that will stay the standard shape of an English coffee cup for the next 100 years. He has 3 drinks on offer: coffee at 4p a cup, tea at 4p a cup, chocolate at 6p. All 3 are drinks of the very recent English past, none of them older in this country than the reign of the King's father. Tea has been in England since about 1657, when it first appeared at Thomas Garway's coffee house in Exchange Alley. Chocolate has been in England since the same season, sold at a chocolate house in the city. All 3 drinks are still, in this year of 1684, expensive small pleasures of the good tradesman class and above, and all 3 are things a Londoner of the labouring sort has drunk only rarely, if at all. The coffee man grinds his beans fresh, in the small wooden mill when a customer orders. He grinds them coarse. He tips the grounds into the copper pot. He pours in the hot water from the tin kettle, which is kept simmering on the brazier. He sets the pot back on the brazier. He waits. He has a small clay hourglass on the counter of about 3 minutes turning, and he waits until the sand has all run through before he pours. Coffee steeped less than 3 minutes is thin. Coffee steeped more than 5 is bitter. His 3 minutes is the ordinary English coffee man's brew of this year. He pours the coffee out of the pot into a pot cup, taking care to hold the pot high, so as to leave the grounds behind in the pot. The cup fills to about 2/3. He sets a small dish of sugar on the counter beside it, a small dish of milk and a small folded paper of ground ginger, in case the customer likes his coffee ginger spiced, as some do in this year. The customer takes his cup, takes a small pinch of sugar in it if he likes, and stands at the counter drinking it. The first customer of the hour is an elderly gentleman in a full-bottomed wig and a good broadcloth coat, who takes his coffee plain and black and stands at the counter, drinking it in careful small sips, holding the cup in his gloved hands for the warmth of it. His face relaxes as the coffee goes down. He tips the coffee man a halfpenny over the 4p. The second customer is a young woman of about 20 in a good wool cloak with a fur trim, accompanied by her husband, who has ordered chocolate for the pair of them. The coffee man makes the chocolate from a small paper of grated chocolate that he keeps in a tin box behind the counter, mixed with hot milk from another small pot on the brazier, and warmed slowly until it is thick and dark and smooth. He hands the 2 cups across the counter. The young woman takes hers in her mittened hands and takes a small first sip. Her eyes close for a moment. Her husband next to her has done the same. They stand together at the counter, drinking the chocolate slowly, saying nothing, tasting it. Neither of them has drunk chocolate before. It is not a common drink in this country yet. It is a small, warm, expensive novelty, and they will remember it as one of the great sensory memories of their evening. The third customer is a country gentleman up from Hertfordshire, in a green wool coat, who orders a cup of tea. The coffee man makes the tea by pouring hot water over a small pinch of dry leaves in a small silver pot he keeps for the purpose. He steeps for 2 minutes. He pours out into a pot cup. The country gentleman takes a first careful sip. He's drinking tea for probably the 3rd or 4th time in his life. He has had it before at a coffee house in Fleet Street on a previous trip to London, and he has heard great things of it, but he is still not sure what to make of it. He takes another sip. He nods slowly, judiciously. Between customers, the coffee man wipes his counter with a small linen cloth. He tends the brazier. He rinses the pot cups in a small basin of hot water at the back of the booth. He grinds fresh beans when the last are done. His whole small ceremony has the quiet, grave, attentive character of a man doing a small, careful task well, and it is one of the fair's small, warm sights. Behind him on the wall of the booth, on a small shelf, sits a stack of 5 books tied with a ribbon. They are pamphlets on the coffee trade. He does not sell them. He keeps them for his own reading in the quieter hours. A man who runs a coffee booth reads the pamphlets of his trade. He is not a scholar, but he knows his trade, and he takes a small quiet pride in knowing it well. The lantern above his booth burns steady in the darkening evening. The brazier glows steady beneath the copper pot. The pot cups gather warmth from the brazier where they stand on the counter. The good sharp smell of freshly ground coffee mingles with the sweet warm smell of chocolate melting and the small clean smell of hot water for tea, and all of them together are one of the small distinctive smells of the fair, one that Londoners will remember, and one that a young couple leaving with the warm cup of chocolate still on their lips will remember as long as they live. The ale booth of John and his wife, up the lane, is where we are going next, for the older, warmer drink of this island, which has been drunk here for the whole span of English history, and which will be drunk here for all the span there is to come. Let us walk back up the lane, past the pancake booth and the printer's booth and the spit booth, to the ale booth of John and his wife. It is where we began the evening, and it is a good place to return to. The booth is warmer now than it was when we first stepped into it. The evening trade has been steady, and every customer who has stood at the counter for a few minutes has brought a little of his own warmth into the small space. The 2 younger children are still asleep against the back wall wrapped in wool. The eldest boy, aged 10, is helping his mother at the counter now. John's wife stands at the counter. Let us call her Anne for the sake of the story. It is a common woman's name in this century, plain and clean, and it will do for a waterman's wife whose real name did not come down to us. Anne is 35. She has a plain good face, an open forehead, brown hair worn under a linen headcloth, and the steady quiet hands of a woman who has kept a household on a small income all her adult life. The kettle on the brazier is a copper kettle of about the capacity of a gallon, tinned inside to keep the copper from taste, with a curved handle for lifting and a straight spout for pouring. It has been in her kitchen at home in Wapping for the whole 18 years of her marriage, a wedding gift from her mother-in-law. It is the workhorse of her booth. Into it, over the course of a day, she puts the small careful mixture of good Kentish brown ale, spiced with a little cinnamon and a very little clove, warmed slowly on the brazier to a temperature just short of boiling, and served out at a penny a quart cup. Beside the copper kettle on the counter stands a small wooden cask of the ordinary Kentish brown ale, tapped through a wooden spile from which she draws fresh ale for the kettle as it empties. Behind the ale cask on a shelf stand 3 small oak casks. One is a cask of mum, one is a cask of good French claret, one is a cask of Spanish sack, a strong sweet white wine from Jerez. The mum is the item most worth a small close look. Mum is a strong dark beer from Brunswick in northern Germany, brewed of wheat malt and an infusion of herbs. Broom, elder, marjoram, sage and pennyroyal, the recipes tell us, heavy and sweet and strong, of a colour like dark treacle and a strength like a good sherry. It has been fashionable in London for the last 20 years or so, since the Restoration, brought back by English gentlemen who had drunk it during their exile years on the continent. There is a mum house in the city that keeps a good stock of the true Brunswick brew, and Anne has bought her cask from there for the fair. She sells the mum at 4p a small pewter cup, of about half a pint. The customer for it is a gentleman of about 40 in a good beaver hat, who has come out from a coffee house in Cornhill for a walk on the ice, and who has heard that Mum is being served at John's booth and has come to try it. He pays his fourpence. Anne draws a small measure from the mum cask into the pewter cup and sets it on the counter. He picks it up and takes a first careful sip. He nods, judiciously. He takes another. He stands at the counter drinking it slowly, savouring it. It is very warming. He will remember it back in his coffee house in an hour, and he will tell the men at his table about it, and 2 of them will come down to the ice tomorrow to try it themselves. The claret and the sack are for a slightly different customer. A gentleman and his lady step up to the counter and ask for a glass of sack apiece. Anne draws the sack into 2 small stem glasses of the ordinary London wine-glass pattern of this year, thick clear glass, short stem, small bowl, and sets them on the counter. 2p a glass. The gentleman pays. He and his lady stand at the counter drinking the sack slowly, and the sweet, clean, strong taste of it warms them from within. The steady, ordinary drink of the booth is the hot, spiced ale from the copper kettle. It is what most of Anne's customers order. It is a warm, cheap, comforting drink, a penny a quart cup, well within the reach of a labouring man's Saturday penny. She ladles it out into thick pot cups from the kettle, with a small copper dipper, hands the cups across the counter, takes the pennies in her palm and drops them in the small wooden till. Every so often a customer tips a halfpenny over the penny, for the warmth of a good cup, and she thanks him in her steady, quiet way. The boy at the counter is her eldest, aged 10. Let us call him Robin. He is a slim, quiet boy with his father's steady dark eyes and his mother's calm mouth. He is learning the trade. He helps by clearing the empty cups from the counter and washing them in a small basin at the back of the booth, and by carrying fresh ale from the cask to the kettle when Anne calls for it, and by counting out the change from the till when Anne is busy with a customer. He does his work quietly and well. His mother is proud of him without saying so. John is standing at the door of the booth, in his ordinary spot greeting the passers-by. He is talking now with a lighterman he has known for 20 years, another man of the Wapping stairs who has come down to the fair for his own supper. The 2 of them stand talking about a piece of business at the Trinity House this morning, and about the price of Newcastle coal at the coal wharves this week. Very high, because the coasting ships are hindered by the ice at the coasts of Kent and Essex, and about a small trouble that a mutual acquaintance is having with his eldest boy. The lantern on the ice at the corner of John's booth burns steady. The brazier under the copper kettle glows steady. The good, warm, sweet spice smell of the mulled ale rises with the steam from the kettle, and fills the small space of the booth, and drifts out through the flap into the cold air of the lane, and mingles with the ordinary smells of the fair. That is the ordinary evening warmth of an English ale booth of this century, on any January evening in any part of this country, and the fact that this one is standing on the frozen face of the River Thames does not change any of it, except to make the small warm smell all the more welcome to the men and women stepping out of the cold to buy their penny cup. The music booth at the middle of the fair is where we're going next, for the fiddles that are already warming their strings for the country dances of the evening. Let us walk down the lane again to the music booth. It stands at about the middle of Freezeland Street, on the north side, a good large tented mansion of about 12 feet across, its sail-cloth walls stretched taut over a heavier-than-usual frame of masts and oars. Above the counter at the door, in careful painted letters on a small wooden sign, is written, "Music within, 1 penny at the door." The keeper of the booth is a woman of about 50, a Cheapside woman, the widow of a Fleet Street musician who died 3 years ago, and who left her his small stock of instruments and his good name in the trade. She's been running the music booth here since the fair opened. She stands at the counter now, in a good wool cloak and a linen headcloth, taking the pennies at the door and handing out small pewter tokens for the ones who mean to come in and out during the evening. Inside the booth it is warm. The floor has been laid deep with straw over its boards. There are 3 tented braziers going instead of 1, spaced along the walls, each casting its small warm ring of red gold light. and in the far end of the booth, on a small low wooden platform, sit the 4 musicians. They are a small consort of the ordinary London tavern musician kind. The lead is a fiddler of about 40, a good sound player in the country dance tradition of the London musicians of this generation. The second is a smaller fiddler of about 30, his brother by adoption. The third is a man of about 50 at a bass viol between his knees, of the smaller kind, which he plays with a short bow held underhand in the older style. The fourth is a young man of about 20 at a small tabor pipe held in the left hand, and a small tabor drum slung at his hip, which he plays with the right hand. Let us call the lead fiddler Jack. He has been a Fleet Street musician all his working life. He plays at weddings, at church feasts, at the hall dinners of the city's great trade companies, and at the ordinary Saturday nights of the taverns of Cornhill and Cheapside. He knows perhaps 200 tunes by heart. He can play any tune anyone gives him after hearing it once through. He is one of the good sound plain workers of the London music trade of this generation, and he is not remembered by name in any modern book, and he was, in his own place and his own time, absolutely respected among his peers. The consort is playing a set of country dances now. They have opened with Grim King of the Ghosts, a slow lyrical tune in a minor key that they have played gently and warmly, and are now moving into Cuckolds All a Row, a quicker tune in a major key, and will finish the set with Sellinger's Round, the beloved old English round dance of this century, which every man and woman in the booth knows the steps to since childhood. The dancers form up on the straw of the floor. There are perhaps 20 couples, mostly Londoners of the middling sort, tradesmen and their wives, apprentices and their girls, 1 or 2 country gentlemen up from the shires. They line up in the 2 long lines of the country dance, men on one side, women on the other. Jack draws his bow across the strings. The tabor pipe joins him. The bass viol comes in. The dance begins. The steps of Cuckolds All a Row are the steps every English country dancer of this century knows. Right hand turn to the partner, left hand turn to the neighbour, a small forward and back, a small figure of 8 around the couple standing cross, and a small progression down the set. The dancers move through the steps together, laughing gently, the women's petticoats swinging, the men's coat-tails swinging, the whole booth warmed by the movement and the music together. It is one of the small warm human sights of the fair. Jack watches from his corner of the platform. He nods encouragingly to a young apprentice couple at the head of the set who are getting the figure right for the first time. He winks at an older lady in a good russet cloak who has caught his eye. He plays his fiddle with the steady sure ease of a lifelong musician, and he is enjoying his evening. The bass viol player, the man of about 50, has closed his eyes and is playing the bass line from memory. He's a Yorkshireman of Norse descent by his surname, who came south as a boy of 15 to be apprenticed in a Fleet Street musician's house, and who has played at London tavern nights for the whole of his working life. He's a plain, grave man in his ordinary manner, and only when he is playing does his face relax into the small, quiet joy of a man doing the thing he loves best. The tabor pipe player, the young man of 20, has both hands full, one on the pipe, the other on the drum. He's grinning openly. He's a Bristol boy who came up to London 2 years ago and who has never in his life played on the ice of a frozen river before, and he is enjoying the strangeness of the whole thing as much as the small warm knowledge that he is playing well. The consort finishes Cuckolds All a Row and moves into Sellinger's Round. The set of dancers reforms into a circle. The circle turns slowly clockwise for the first 4 bars, then anti-clockwise for the next 4, then in and out for the next 8, in the beloved old pattern. The dancers laugh gently. The music fills the booth and drifts out into the lane through the flaps of the sailcloth walls, faint and warm. A small cluster of listeners has gathered outside the booth, standing at the door and looking in. Some of them are hearing the music from a booth or 2 down the lane. Some are hearing it as they walk past. All of them stop for a moment and stand for a moment and listen for a moment, and then some come in and pay their penny, and some walk on with the tune in their heads for the rest of their evening. Outside the booth, on the wider stretch of the ice near the middle of the river, the Rotterdam skater is doing his own performance for his own smaller ring of watchers, in his own quieter, warmer way, and that is where we're going next. Let us step out of the music booth and cross the wider stretch of ice at the middle of the fair. It is dark now above us. The sky is the black winter sky of a London January, high and cold and dusted with stars where the sea coal smoke of the city thins out enough to let them through. The wider stretch of the ice here is perhaps 60 paces across, an open, smooth, pale plain lit only by the horn lanterns along the corner posts of the booth lane, and by the small brass corner lanterns of a hackney coach standing at rest on it. In the middle of this stretch, in the wide, clear space, is a ring of about 100 people, standing patient and quiet, all watching one small figure moving through the middle of the ring. The figure is the Rotterdam skater. He's a Dutchman of about 30, in a plain dark coat and dark breeches, with a plain linen collar and a small dark hat, and a plain grave friendly face. He has been at the fair since the 10th of January, and he has been performing every afternoon and every evening in this same open space for the small crowds who gather to watch. He does not take a fare at a door. He takes what people care to drop in a wooden box he keeps on the ice at the edge of the ring. He seems to do well enough at it. On his feet are the skates. They are of the pattern that has been used in Holland for the better part of 200 years, a small carved wooden platform shaped to the sole of the shoe, with a long thin iron blade fitted underneath, curled up at the front like the toe of a Turkish slipper, running the full length of the shoe and a little beyond at each end. The skate is strapped to the shoe by leather thongs across the instep and around the ankle. It is the ancestor of every modern skate. He moves on the ice in a way no Londoner has ever seen a man move before. It looks like a kind of standing dance done at speed without effort. He glides forward on one skate for 4 beats. He turns at speed and glides backward on the other for 4. He crosses one foot in front of the other and comes round in a tight small figure. He turns again, spins gently for a moment and stops. The whole time his upper body's upright and calm and quiet, his arms slightly out for balance, his face almost still, as though the effort of it were being done by some other body entirely. The ring of Londoners watches. They are on the whole very quiet. Now and again a small ripple of applause runs round the ring at a particularly beautiful turn, and once a small boy in the front row lets out a low exclamation of pure delight. But mostly the watchers just watch, in the small hushed way of a crowd seeing something they have never seen before and do not quite have words for. The Dutchman does a slow figure of 8, big and generous, covering perhaps 20 paces from side to side. He comes back to his starting point. He bows very slightly to the crowd. There is a small warm ripple of clapping. Then he begins the more difficult figures. He glides fast down the length of the clear ice, and at the end of the run he leaps into the air, spins his body once completely round, and lands cleanly on the same skate. It is a spectacular thing to see. The crowd claps openly. Some of the small boys in the front row cheer. He nods a small acknowledgement. He turns and glides back to the middle. He does a spin. He stands still on the 2 skates, then he lifts one leg slowly, and he begins to turn on the toe of the standing skate gently at first, then faster, arms drawn into his chest, until he is spinning like a top on the ice, at the speed a well-spun top will spin. The crowd is silent. He slows the spin gradually, letting his arms out until he comes to a still stop, and stands on the 2 skates again, as calm as at the beginning. The clapping is warm and long. He is, without knowing it, one of the seeds of a whole future English tradition. Within 100 years, the first skating club in the world will be founded in Edinburgh in 1742, and English skaters will begin to develop their own English style, and within 200 years figure skating will be a formal sport with its own English champions. All of that lies ahead. What we are watching tonight is the Dutch practice of the 1680s, being seen by a small ring of Londoners for the first time on the ice of the frozen Thames. 2 small English boys have been standing at the edge of the ring for the last quarter hour. watching the Dutchmen with rapt attention. They are boys of about 12, well-dressed, sons of a Fleet Street lawyer. When the performance is over and the Dutchman is putting on his cloak against the cold and rolling up the 2 skates in their leather straps, one of the boys walks up to him shyly and asks in careful schoolroom Latin whether the skates can be bought in London. The Dutchman answers him in careful schoolroom Latin too, that they can be bought in Rotterdam by anyone who cares to write for a pair, and that the price is not very great. The boy thanks him gravely. He goes back to his brother, and the 2 of them walk off up the lane discussing the 2 guilders and how they might raise 2 guilders between them by the summer, and what their father might say if they wrote to Rotterdam. The Dutchman himself, when he has rolled his skates and pocketed the takings of his wooden box, walks slowly off the ice toward the Temple stairs. He's staying at a merchant's house in Coleman Street this winter in exchange for some private lessons in Dutch to the merchant's sons. He's warmly wrapped in a heavy dark cloak, and he moves with the slightly rolling walk of a man who has been on skates all evening and is now on ordinary shoes. The lantern on the ice at the corner of the printer's booth burns steady in the middle distance. The music booth's fiddles are still going faintly, playing another set. The Dutchman crosses the wider stretch of ice, steps up onto the Temple stairs, and disappears into the dark alleys of the north bank. His small ring of watchers, meanwhile, drifts back into the lane of booths and disperses among the other pleasures of the evening. The puppet play under its striped canopy, further down the lane, is where we are going next. Let's walk down the lane past the ale booths and the pancake booths and the printer's booth again, and come to a small striped canopy set up between 2 ordinary booths at about the middle of the fair on the south side. The canopy is a small tented structure of red and white striped sailcloth, a good deal smaller than a proper booth. It has 3 sides and an open front, and inside the open front, on a small raised wooden stage of about the length of a man's arm and the height of a small table, is a puppet theatre. The puppeteer is a man of about 50, a thin, quick man with a lined face and a small dark beard, dressed in a plain dark coat and a soft cap. Let us call him Robert. He's a Bermondsey man who has kept a puppet show in London these 30 years, at fairs and church feasts and the ordinary summer holidays of the year, in the tradition of the 17th century English puppeteers of the Bartholomew Fair. He has 3 shows in his repertory: The Devil and Dr. Faustus, done as a small comic morality of about a quarter of an hour; Punch and Judy, in the English form the puppet Pulcinella from Italy has been taking in this country since Samuel Pepys first saw the puppet in Covent Garden in the reign of the present king; and St. George and the Dragon, a good old English folk piece. He is doing Punch and Judy at this hour, because it is the easiest of the 3 shows to draw a small evening crowd for at a fair, and because Punch is the character every English child of this century begins to know at about the age of 5. The puppets are hand puppets of the ordinary English puppeteer's kind. Carved wooden heads with painted faces and articulated wooden jaws for Punch and Judy, and a cloth costume worn over the puppeteer's hand and arm, with the head fitted onto the tips of the fingers. Robert works 2 puppets at once, one on each hand standing hidden behind a small backdrop, and speaks their voices in the characteristic Punch and Judy manner. Punch in the high squeaky voice made by a small metal contrivance called a swazzle, held between the teeth, and Judy in his own ordinary voice, coloured a little higher for the wife. The audience at the small canopy is about 30 people. Half of them are children, brought by their mothers and fathers for the small warm pleasure of a puppet show. The other half are grown men and women who are enjoying it as much as the children, in the way of Punch and Judy audiences in this country, from that day to this. They have paid a farthing apiece at the door of the canopy, a farthing being a quarter of a penny, and Robert's boy, aged perhaps 12, is standing at the door taking the farthings in his cap. The show goes through its ordinary paces. Punch beats his baby. Punch beats Judy. Judy beats him back. The beadle comes to arrest Punch. The devil comes to take Punch away. Punch outwits them all in his ordinary Punch and Judy way. The audience laughs at every turn. The children scream at the appearance of the devil in the small, pleased, frightened scream of children who know it is only a puppet but who enjoy the small, pleasant thrill of being afraid at it anyway. The parents laugh at the children and at Punch together. The show lasts perhaps a quarter of an hour. At the end, Robert steps out from behind the backdrop and takes his bow. The audience claps warmly. Some of the parents drop a small extra penny into the boy's cap on the way out. The audience disperses back into the lane, the children pulling at their parents' hands and telling them about their favourite parts, and the parents laughing gently and agreeing. At the next canopy along, only 2 booths further down the lane, is a small interlude company. Interludes are short comic plays, usually with only 3 or 4 characters, played by a small company of adult actors on a small raised stage without scenery. The interlude company at the fair is a company of 4 men and 1 woman, in the tradition of the small English travelling players of the century. They are doing a short comic piece called The Merry Tinker, of about 20 minutes length, in which a tinker of the road outwits a country squire out of a joint of beef and a good coat. The audience at the interlude is smaller than the puppet shows, about 15 people, mostly grown men and women, paying a penny apiece at the door. The interlude company has been on the road together for about 6 years. They know each other's work by heart. The tinker is played by a man of about 35, a good comic character actor with an expressive face and a fine sense of timing. The squire is played by an older man of about 50, with a natural stately manner that is perfect for the piece. The woman who plays the squire's wife is a good clear-voiced actress of about 40, one of the small handful of actresses of the London commercial stage of this generation who are able to travel with a small road company between engagements. The Merry Tinker plays out in the ordinary interlude way. A good clean comic plot, a small chase, a small ridiculous disguise, and a happy ending in which the tinker walks off with the joint of beef and the good coat, while the squire and his wife are left to explain themselves to the audience. The audience laughs warmly and applauds at the end. The company takes its bow. The next show begins in 20 minutes. Both the puppet show and the interlude are small, warm evening pleasures of the fair. Neither of them is a great work of art. Neither of them is meant to be. They are the small, warm, honest entertainments of a Restoration Londoner's evening out, taken by farthing and by penny, enjoyed at the level of a child and at the level of a grown-up together, and remembered as small, warm parts of an evening. And that is what they are on the ice of the fair tonight, and that is what they were at Bartholomew Fair every August of this century, and that is what they will still be at English fairs and church feasts for centuries to come. The ballad singers at the corners of the booths further down the lane are where we're going next. Let us walk down the lane a little further. At the corner of every 3rd or 4th booth along Freezeland Street, standing in the small warm ring of a horn lantern, is a ballad singer. The ballad singer at the corner of the printer's booth is a woman of about 45, in a good stout wool cloak and a linen headcloth. Let us call her Peg. She is a Whitechapel woman, the widow of a Fleet Street pressman, who has kept herself and her 3 grown children in the ballad selling trade for the last 8 years. She has a good clear singing voice, an alto that carries in the open air, and she's been singing along Freezeland Street for the whole 3 weeks of the fair. She stands at her corner with a stack of fresh printed ballad sheets in her arm, each sheet a single large square of coarse paper, printed on one side only, with the words of a ballad set out in a single column and a small crude woodcut of a scene from the ballad at the top. Beside her, on a small folding wooden stand, is a longer rack with another 20 or so sheets on display. She sells the sheets at a penny apiece. The ballads on the fair are ballads of the fair. The one she is holding up now in her stronger hand is called The Frost Fair on the Thames. It is a new ballad, printed only last week by one of the presses on the ice, of about 20 verses, telling the story of the freezing of the river and the setting up of the booths and the coming of the king and the small pleasures of the whole thing, in the ordinary ballad way. Peg has been singing it, 1 verse at a time, at her corner all evening. She sings a verse now. Her voice comes out warm and steady in the cold air of the lane. The verse she sings is one of the middle verses of the ballad, about the printer's press and the sixpence a name, and Croom himself, standing at his counter 2 paces away, hears the verse and smiles a small, pleased smile at the mention. The ballad Peg is singing is set to a familiar Old English tune. The English broadside ballad of this century is, by long custom, set to a tune the singer already knows, a tune such as Fortune My Foe, or Chevy Chase, or Sellinger's Round, or Greensleeves, or any of 100 other old melodies that a Londoner has known since childhood. The ballad printers put the name of the tune at the top of the sheet in place of the music, and the buyer takes it home and sings the words to the tune he already knows. It is a beautifully economical system, and it has been the way English ballads have been sold and sung for about 150 years now. A young apprentice comes up to Peg's corner and buys a copy of the ballad for a penny. He takes the sheet from her, folded neatly along its middle, and slips it inside his coat pocket. He wants it to take home to his mother, who lives out at Poplar and who has not been able to come down to the fair, so that she can read it aloud to his sisters on Sunday afternoon by the fire. Peg sells another sheet to a middle-aged woman in a good wool cloak. Then she sings another verse. This one is about the coach, and 6 on the 5th of January that first tested the ice. Her voice carries down the lane, and a small pause runs through the crowd at that corner as they listen to it, and then the crowd moves on. There is a second ballad on Peg's rack tonight. It is called The Thames Uncased, or The Waterman's Song upon the Thaw. It is a ballad that will not actually be sung for another 2 weeks, when the ice breaks up and the fair ends and the watermen sing their good-humoured farewell to the temporary business of the ice. Peg has an early manuscript copy from her cousin who works in one of the ballad print shops of Little Britain. She's not selling that one yet. She's waiting for the thaw. A little further down the lane, at the corner of the pancake booth, stands another ballad singer. He's a man of about 30, a smaller, lighter voice, a cockney of the Southwark stairs, who sings the older ballads of the century for change. He's singing Chevy Chase, as we come past, in his careful, practised way. Chevy Chase is one of the oldest of the English narrative ballads, the story of the battle between Percy and Douglas at the Cheviot Hills in the 15th century, of about 70 verses sung to a slow air, beloved of every English generation from Elizabeth's day to this one. Sir Philip Sidney once said that the old song of Percy and Douglas moved his heart more than a trumpet, and it is that same old song this Southwark man is singing at the corner of a pancake booth in the middle of the frozen Thames tonight. A small knot of listeners has stopped to hear him. 2 of them are country gentlemen up from Northumberland, and they know the ballad by heart, and they are mouthing the words along with him as he sings. They will buy a copy of the sheet from him at the end of the song, out of pure, warm, sentimental attachment to the old thing, and one of them will drop a 3pence in his cap instead of a penny. Between the ballad singers, at intervals along the lane, are also the sellers of the small printed maps and prints of the fair. One young man of about 25, standing between 2 booths at the middle of the lane, has spread out a small stand with a dozen prints of the fair for sale. The best-selling of them is a copper-engraved map called A Map of the River Thames, merrily called Blanket Fair, as it was frozen in the memorable year 1683 and 4. It shows Freezeland Street plainly, with the 2 rows of booths, and the King's Own view from Whitehall marked in, and it names the fair by both its names in one breath. He is selling it at 3pence a copy. The whole lane, at this hour, is filled with the small warm music of the ballad singers at their corners, weaving in and out of the general talk of the crowd and the fiddles from the music booth, and the small dull knock of a hackney coach going by. It is a very old and very English kind of soundscape. It is the soundscape of Bartholomew Fair every August. It is the soundscape of every country fair in this country every year. It is one of the small warm continuities that connects this fair, standing on the frozen face of a river, to every other fair that Englishmen and Englishwomen have kept in this country for centuries before and centuries after. The peddler with his diamond rings, further down the lane, is where we're going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm, the ice holds. Let us walk down the lane a little further. At the corner of a small ale booth, standing in the warm ring of another horn lantern, is a peddler with a small wooden tray hung from a strap around his neck. The peddler is a man of about 35, thin, quick-eyed, a talker. He is not a Londoner. He is up from Kent, or so he says. He wears a good enough dark coat and a soft cap, and he has the easy warm patter of a man who has done small trade at fairs all his working life. On his tray are laid out in careful rows perhaps 30 small metal rings, each set with a small clear stone. The stones catch the light of the horn lantern and throw it back very brightly. Each ring seems, at first glance, to be set with a small diamond. The peddler is calling in a warm, gentle voice for the ladies and gentlemen of the fair to come and look. He is selling the rings, he says, at 3p apiece, of which he says that it is a fair trade, because the workmanship is honest and the setting is pewter, and no man should ask more for such small stones on such a night. The stones are not diamonds, they are small, carefully cut pieces of clear ice, pressed into the pewter settings by a small workshop the peddler keeps on the Southwark side of the river for the duration of the frost. The ice comes off the same great sheet the fair is standing on, and it is cut into small clear octagonal shapes on a Cheapside jeweller's wheel by an out-of-work apprentice for a small commission, and it is set into pewter rings for another small commission by a pewterer in Bermondsey. The whole small trade is one of the small, quiet, humorous businesses of the fair, and every Londoner who buys a ring knows more or less what he is buying. The peddler is honest about it, in his ordinary way. He does not ever call the stones diamonds outright. He calls them the finest of ice diamonds and as bright as anything you will ever see for the money, and a keepsake of the great frost fair on the Thames. His customers, on the whole, take the joke in good spirit. They buy the rings for a 3p, they wear them on the ice for the rest of the evening, and by the time they get home the stones have quietly melted away in the warmth of a pocket or a warm parlour, leaving only the small empty pewter setting behind as a small quiet memento of a small quiet fraud. The peddler is doing brisk trade tonight. A young man and his sweetheart step up to the tray. He picks out a ring for her. She holds up her finger. He slides it on. It fits well enough. She smiles a small warm smile and gives him a kiss on the cheek there in front of the tray. He pays the 3p. They walk on down the lane together, hand in hand, the ring on her finger catching the lantern light and throwing it back. Within an hour the stone will have melted away in the warmth of her hand, and she will notice the empty setting and laugh, and he will laugh too, and the ring itself will still be a warm memory of the evening for the rest of their lives. The ballad, The Frost Fair on the Thames, that Peg was singing at the corner up the lane a few minutes ago, has a verse about this small trade. Here you may buy a diamond ring for naught, the ballad sings, and the singer holds the line a moment for the small, warm, knowing laugh of the crowd. Because everyone at this fair knows what he is buying. When he buys an ice diamond for a 3p, and no peddler was ever brought before a magistrate for it, because the whole small trade was done in the open and in good humour. A small honest fraud is a small warm part of an evening. A large dishonest one is not. And the peddlers on Freezeland Street know the difference and stay on the right side of it. Beyond the diamond ring peddler, at the corner of the next booth stands another small trader. He is selling small copper rings with small pieces of coloured glass set in them, and he is honest about them, and he is selling them at a penny apiece. Beyond him is a woman selling small wooden dolls carved in Southwark for 2p, and beyond her is a man selling small bags of dried gingerbread for a halfpenny. All of them are small, warm, honest trades. All of them do steady business at the fair. All of them will pack up their trays at 11 this evening and go home to a warm supper and a warm bed and a warm night's sleep. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. That is the small good sentence for this hour of the fair. Everything a Londoner needs is within reach on this ice tonight, at fair prices, from honest tradesmen, in the warm ring of a horn lantern at every corner post. There is one small warm consideration in this century that a modern reader may want to sit with for a moment. The rule of the fair prices runs, as the ballad puts it, What cost 3p ashore cost 4p on the ice. Everything on Freezeland Street costs about a third more than it would in the ordinary shops of Cheapside or the Strand. This is the fair's small tax. It pays the booth keepers for their extra labour of pitching a booth on a frozen river. It pays the watermen for the rent of their converted wherries. It pays the extra premium for the coal and the paper and the good beef that must be dragged down the water stairs onto the ice. It is not gouging. It is the ordinary economics of a fair on the frozen face of a river in the middle of the coldest winter in 1,000 years. And every fair goer of this evening understands the mathematics of it, without needing to have them explained. The lottery, the toys, and the pigeonholes are where we are going next, back up the lane past the printer's booth, to a booth on the north side that has been quietly the busiest small games booth of the fair for the last 3 weeks. Let us walk back up the lane and cross to the north side to a booth that stands between 2 alehouses, and that has been quietly the busiest small games booth on Freezeland Street. The booth is kept by a man of about 40, a Cheapside grocer in ordinary times who has moved his lightest table and one of his sons down onto the ice for the duration of the fair. His name we shall not invent. His booth has 3 small games running at once, and a small wooden counter across its front on which the games are laid out. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. The first game is the lottery. On the counter is a small covered wooden box with a hole in the top, and beside it a stack of small folded paper tickets. A player pays a penny at the counter and draws a ticket from the box. On the ticket is either a small prize drawn from a shelf of small prizes behind the counter, a small tin whistle, a small copper ring, a small painted wooden doll, a small paper of gingerbread, a small pewter thimble, or the word blank. About 1 ticket in 3 is a prize, the rest are blanks. The grocer runs the game honestly, on an average payout of about a halfpenny per penny ticket, and he takes his living from the difference. Nobody who plays it minds the odds, because the pleasure of drawing the ticket is the whole point. A small girl of about 7, brought by her mother, draws a ticket. It is a blank. The girl looks up at her mother with grave brown eyes. Her mother smiles gently. The grocer, without missing a beat, reaches under the counter and hands the girl a small tin whistle anyway, at his own cost, with a small warm word about her being a good sport. The girl brightens. She puts the whistle to her lips and blows a small clear note. Her mother thanks the grocer with her eyes. They move on. The second game is the toys. A small stand at the side of the booth holds perhaps 20 small toys for sale. Small wooden horses on wheels for a penny, small painted wooden dolls for 2p, small tin trumpets for a halfpenny, small painted balls for a farthing. A young father comes up to the stand with his boy of about 6 on his shoulders. The boy points at one of the wooden horses. The father takes it down, hands it to him, pays the penny. The boy holds the horse in his 2 small hands for the rest of the evening, and it will be one of the small warm things of his childhood memory that his father bought him a wooden horse at the Great Frost Fair on the Thames in the year 1684. The third game is the pigeonholes. This is an old English tavern game of the century, played on a small wooden board about the size of a large book, laid flat on the counter, with 9 small arched openings cut into one long edge of it. Each opening is numbered above it, from 1 to 9. Small wooden balls of about the size of a walnut are rolled down a small chute at the far end of the board, and where each ball comes to rest determines the score. A player pays a halfpenny to roll 3 balls. If the balls score above a certain agreed total, the player wins back his stake and a small extra prize. If not, the grocer keeps the halfpenny. The pigeonholes are being played by a small knot of Fleet Street apprentices in good coats. They are laughing gently and betting halfpennies against each other, in the ordinary happy young man's way of a tavern game at a fair. The grocer watches them warmly from behind the counter. He knows their master, who has a shop 3 doors down from his own in Cheapside. He has known the boys since they were small. He gives them a small extra courtesy on the odds, which they do not notice, and which is his ordinary small kindness of the fair. Behind the pigeonholes on the counter is a small set of 9 pins. Ninepins is a game of the same family as the modern game of tenpins, and in this century it is played in every English tavern yard and at every English fair. 9 wooden pins are set up in a diamond pattern at the far end of a small alley of boards, and a wooden ball is rolled down the alley to knock them down. The player who knocks down the most pins wins. The grocer has set up a small alley of boards on the ice at the side of his booth, and a party of 3 young men is having a go at the 9 pins now. They pay a penny for 3 rolls each. They laugh gently and cheer each other on. The pins go over with a good satisfying clatter on the frozen boards. The one who wins takes home a small pewter tankard as his prize. The whole booth is a warm, good-humoured place. It is the small, happy games booth of the fair, and its keeper is one of the small, kindly figures of Freezeland Street. Every child who comes to his lottery goes away with a small prize, whether he drew one or not. Every apprentice who plays his pigeon holes for an evening ends the evening a halfpenny lighter, but a great deal warmer in the memory. Every young man who rolls his 3 9-pin balls ends the game laughing. Between the games, a Cheapside couple in good wool cloaks stand at the front of the counter watching. Let us call them Mr. and Mrs. Brown of Cheapside. He's a tradesman of about 50, a linen draper by trade, with a good round face and a warm laugh. She's a woman of about the same age, with a soft plump face under a linen headcloth and a small careful smile. They have been walking the fair for the last hour, and they have decided to stop here and watch the games for a while before they walk on. They are not going to play. They are past the age of playing. But they are enjoying watching the small, warm, human pleasure of other people playing, in the small, quiet way of a couple who have been happily married for 25 years, and who take their ordinary evening pleasures now in watching other people take theirs. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. The night sky above the fair is where we are going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. Let us walk out of the lane of booths again, and cross the wider stretch of ice at the middle of the fair, and stand for a while at the very middle of the frozen river, and look up. It is about 9 in the evening. The fair is still busy, but it is beginning to quieten. The music booth is still going. The ballad singers are still at their corners. The coffee booth and the ale booth are still open. But the pancake booth has closed for the night, and the spit booth's beef is finished, and the puppet play is doing its last show of the evening, and the interlude company has packed its small stage. The sky above us is a great high winter London sky. It is not quite pure black. It is the deep dark blue of a January night in a great city where sea-coal smoke rises from 100,000 chimneys and fills the lower half-mile of the atmosphere with a soft grey-brown haze that a modern eye would find heavy, but that a Londoner of this century takes for granted as the ordinary smell of home. The smoke thins out about 1/4 of a mile above the streets. Above that the sky is clean, and the stars are showing. Directly overhead the great winter constellations are up. Orion is riding high in the south. The Great Bear is standing on its tail in the northeast. The Pleiades are a small close cluster high in the west. Sirius, the brightest of the fixed stars, is a hard, steady, blue-white point above the low southern horizon over the Southwark marshes. Every one of these was up over this same river on every clear January night of every year since the Ice Ages, and every one of them will still be up over this river on every clear January night for as long as the world has a sky. The moon is not up. Tonight is a dark night by moon. The stars have the sky to themselves. That is why Londoners have been able to see the constellations so clearly through the smoke tonight. On a bright moon night, the smoke reflects the moonlight into a general glow that dims the stars, but tonight the stars are as clear as they get over this city, and the sight of Orion above the black bulk of Old London Bridge to the east is one of the small, quiet beauties of the fair. Along the 2 banks of the frozen river, we can see the small pinpoint lights of London at this hour. To the north, the Watergate of Whitehall Palace burns bright with the twin great flambeaux at its outer doors, and up above the Watergate the lit windows of the palace itself pick out its lower story in a soft rectangular pattern. Further east, along the north bank, the small windows of the Strand houses show. Further east still, at the top of the temple stairs, the small lantern of the temple church shows against the dark sky. Further east still, beyond the temple, along the length of the north bank of Fleet Street and Ludgate Hill, the small scattered lights of the ordinary houses of the city climb the low hill toward the rising walls of St. Paul's, which is still under scaffolding for its new dome. To the south, the marshy Southwark shore has fewer lights, the small yellow squares of the bankside inns, the far small light of the Falcon Stairs, and further off the small dark shapes of the timber yards. Above the north bank at the top of Ludgate Hill, the small square shape of St. Bride's Church Tower shows against the sky. As we stand looking up, the 4 bells of St. Bride's begin to ring the 9:15 in the small, careful sequence of the English quarter chime. It is a warm sound. It carries very cleanly across the ice, because sound carries on ice as it carries on water, and it reaches us at the middle of the river with all its warmth intact. Behind it, a moment later, the bells of St. Clement Danes begin their own quarter chime, and behind them the bells of St. Martin in the Fields, and behind them, deepest of all, the great slow single note of St. Paul's, half a mile up the hill, sounding its own quarter with the great bell hung under the scaffolding of the new dome. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. Standing beside us at this hour, back on the ice for a second visit, is John Evelyn. He came back down from Whitehall an hour ago to see the fair by lantern light, and he has stood at Croom's counter for a good 10 minutes watching a card be printed, and he has walked the length of Freezeland Street from end to end, and he is now on his way back to Whitehall, where his coach is waiting to take him home to Sayes Court in Deptford. He has stopped for a moment at the middle of the river to look up at the stars. He is 63 this winter. He has seen a great many nights in his life. He has seen more strange sights than most Englishmen of his generation. He has been to Paris in the minority of Louis XIV, and to Naples, and to Rome, and to Padua. He has watched Christopher Wren's St. Paul's rise from its foundations year by year. He has watched the Great Fire of London consume the old St. Paul's from vantage points across the city, including from the bankside south of the river, one September in 1666. He has attended the king in his private chambers many times, and now, standing at the middle of the frozen Thames on the 24th of January in the year 1684, with Orion above him and St. Paul's bell tolling 9 1/4 behind him, and the lanterns of the fair burning along the ice on either side, he's having one of the great sensory experiences of his life. Tonight, when he gets home to Sayes Court and sits down at his desk in his study with a candle at his elbow, he will write the entry that will fix this fair in the English memory forever. He will write about the streets of booths, the shops of wares, the coaches, the sleds, the sliding with skates, the bull baiting, the horse and coach races, the puppet plays and interludes, the cooks and the tippling. He will call the whole thing a bacchanalian triumph or carnival on the water. That phrase will be quoted in every subsequent English book about frost fairs for the next 342 years. He turns now from the middle of the river and begins to walk back toward the Whitehall stairs. His footsteps make a small soft sound on the ice. His coach is waiting for him at the top of the stairs. It is a warm evening in his own life. He is aware, in his ordinary quiet way, that he is standing on the frozen face of a river he has crossed by wherry 1,000 times, and that no man in his family before him has ever stood in this exact place, on this exact ground. That is the small quiet privilege of a very cold winter, and he takes it with the small quiet gratitude of a man who has always taken the small quiet privileges of his life with gratitude. Behind him, the lanterns of Freezeland Street burn along the ice, and the fair goes on. But the fair is beginning to quieten now. The booths are beginning to think about closing for the night. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds, and that is where we are going next, into the quieter hours of the fair. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. It is a little after 9 now. The last of the day's regular customers has gone. The lane is thinning. And along Freezeland Street, in the small ordinary way of every market at the end of its day, the booth-keepers are beginning to pack down. Let us stand at the pancake booth of Bess. She has folded her small hand-painted sign and slid it under the counter. She is scraping the last of the batter off the griddle with the wooden spatula. She wipes the griddle down with a small linen cloth. She lifts the empty batter bowl and washes it in a small basin of hot water at the back of the booth. She banks the charcoal in her brazier by heaping the coals to one side and covering them with a thin layer of ash, so that they will still be alive tomorrow morning for a quick relight. She takes down the small stack of gingerbread wedges that is not sold in its wooden box, and slips the box into a large linen bag. She takes down the small kettle of spiced ale that has not been drunk. She wraps the two things together in a folded linen cloth. She stacks the 4 unsold codlings in a small wooden bowl and covers it. Everything goes into the bag. Her booth's sailcloth walls are lashed at the corners to 2 upright oars. She unlashes them, working slowly with cold fingers, taking care not to hurry. The walls come down first. She folds them in the practised way of a woman who has done this a great many nights. 3 folds along the long axis, then 3 folds along the short, into a neat parcel of about the size of a small mattress. She lays the parcel on the ice beside the booth, then the roof. The roof comes down in the same way, then the 2 upright oars, then the small counter, which is a plank of wood laid across 2 barrels. The plank goes onto the pile beside her. The 2 barrels go onto the pile beside her. The small griddle, cool now, goes onto the pile beside her. Her husband is not a waterman. Her husband is a shoemaker off Wapping High Street, and he is at home now with the 2 younger children waiting for her. But her brother, who is a lighter man, has come down to the fair to help her pack. He's standing at her side now. Together they load the whole small pile onto a small wooden sledge her brother has brought down from the water stairs. The sledge is a converted wherry in the ordinary fair fashion, with wooden runners fitted to its keel and a leather strap for pulling. The 2 of them roll the small pile of the booth up the ramp of the sledge and lash it in place, and then her brother takes the strap and Bess walks alongside him, and together they draw the small sledge up the length of the lane toward the temple stairs. At every 2nd or 3rd booth along Freezeland Street the same small quiet packing is happening. The interlude company is folding its stage. The puppeteer is putting his puppets into their box. The peddler with the diamond rings is closing his tray and slipping it under his coat. The lottery booth is closing the lid on the box of tickets. About half the booths of Freezeland Street will be packed and gone up the stairs by 10 this evening, and only about half will stay open through the night for the small late trade. The ones that stay open are the practical ones. The coffee booth stays open. The ale booth of John and Anne stays open. Croom's printer's booth stays open, though at a much reduced pace, for the small late custom of a passing gentleman who wants a card printed for a Sunday morning breakfast surprise. The mum booth 2 doors down stays open for the late drinkers. One of the 4 spit booths stays open through the night for the late suppers. About 20 booths in all remain lit past 10 this evening. The rest fold down and go home. At the temple stairs, at the top of the ramp, Bess helps her brother push the sledge up onto the stone landing. He lifts the load off the sledge with the practised strength of a lighterman. She takes the small linen bag of unsold things. They walk together up the narrow, slippery stone stairs, out of the wind, into the small, warm dark of the top of the stairs, where a link boy stands waiting with a lit torch. Bess pays the link boy a halfpenny. He walks them up through the small dark alleys of the temple, out to Fleet Street, and up Fleet Street to the corner of Bride Lane, where Bess and her brother turn off to walk east toward Wapping and their homes. Behind them, at the ice, the lantern at the corner post of Bess's booth is dark. The corner post itself has been taken down. The ground where the booth stood is empty now, a small clean rectangle of exposed ice among the still-lit booths that flank it. In the morning, the empty rectangle will be swept and reset, and a new booth may be pitched on it, or the 2 neighbouring booths may spread out into the space. The fair is a living thing. It changes every day. Back at Bess's own house at home in Wapping, the ordinary things of her ordinary evening will happen. Her husband will have kept the kitchen fire alive. Her 2 younger children will be in bed already. He will pour her a small cup of hot ale from the pot on the hob, and they will sit together at the small kitchen table for a quarter hour before bed, and she will tell him about the small warm moments of her evening at the booth. He will listen. He will pour her a second cup. They will bank the fire together and go up to bed. Meanwhile, at the ice, the lanterns still lit at midnight are where we are going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. It is midnight now, or as close to midnight as makes no difference. The bells of St. Bride's have just rung the 12 strokes of it, and behind St. Bride's the bells of the other city churches have rung theirs. The last of the 12 strokes of St. Paul's is still echoing across the frozen face of the river, slow and deep, holding the moment in its warmth. Freezeland Street is quiet now. Along the length of the lane only about 20 booths are still lit. Each burns its horn lantern at its corner post. Each is its own small tented golden square in the great dark stretch of the frozen river. Between them, the empty rectangles of the packed-down booths make dark gaps in the pattern of light, like missing teeth in a warm, friendly smile. Let us walk down the length of the lane by lantern light. The ice underfoot is quieter now than it was, because the crowd is gone. The straw of the pathway has been trodden to a soft brown matting. The wind up the river has died down. The night is cold but still. At the ale booth of John and Anne, Anne is at the counter alone. John has gone home an hour ago to relieve his wife's sister, who has been minding the 2 younger children in a small room the family shares off Wapping High Street. Anne has kept the booth open for the night, in the ordinary way of a waterman's booth at this fair. She sleeps here now for the duration of the frost, on a small nest of wool blankets on a folded stack of sailcloth against the back wall, waking every hour or so to tend the brazier and take a late order at the counter. She stands at the counter now, her hands turned in front of the brazier, warming. Her eldest boy, Robin, is asleep against the back wall in the nest of blankets, wrapped in wool. He has spent the last hour helping her wash pot cups and stack fresh ones. She has told him to sleep now for the deep of the night. He is a good boy. He was asleep within a minute. The kettle on the brazier is still holding its warm spiced ale. She ladles herself a small pot cup and stands drinking it slowly, warming her hands on the cup. It is one of the small warm moments of her evening. The last customer gone for the moment, the boy asleep, the counter cleared, the brazier glowing steady, the kettle steaming faintly, the lantern at the corner post burning bright, the whole small tented mansion warm in hers. A late customer comes to the counter. It is a gentleman of about 50 in a good broadcloth coat and a beaver hat. He has been at a friend's house in Whitefriars for the evening, and he is walking home to Southwark by way of the ice, because it is a shorter walk than by way of the bridge. He orders a small pot cup of the hot spiced ale for a penny, and stands at the counter drinking it slowly. He wishes her a good night. She wishes him one back. He walks on down the lane toward the Barge House stairs. 2 booths down, at the coffee booth, the coffee man is still open. He has 3 customers at his counter, a party of 3 young men returning from a supper in Cheapside to their lodgings in Southwark, who have stopped for a small cup of coffee to warm themselves for the last of the walk. The coffee man makes the 3 cups in his careful practised way. Fresh grounds, hot water, 3 minutes in the hourglass, poured out slowly. The young men drink their coffee standing at the counter, talking quietly. They pay their 4pences apiece. They walk on. 2 booths further down, at Croom's printer's booth, the lantern is still lit, but the press is quiet. Croom himself is at the back of the booth, sitting on a small stool by the brazier, reading a small book by the light of a single candle. His boy is asleep against the back wall, wrapped in wool. The tray of type has been cleared and packed away in its wooden case. The paper has been stacked and covered. The ink balls have been wiped and hung on a small hook to keep them from freezing. The press itself stands still and quiet and beautiful in the corner of the booth, its wooden lever hanging idle. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. At the mum booth 2 down from Croom, A late gentleman is standing at the counter with a small pewter cup of the good Brunswick mum in his hand, drinking it slowly, warming himself for the walk home. He is not talking. He is just drinking. The keeper of the booth is a woman of about 35, alone at her counter, tending her own brazier. She does not press him for conversation. Some drinkers want to talk, some want to stand quietly. She knows the difference by long experience. She lets him stand quietly. At the far end of the lane, at the last spit booth, a whole side of pork is now on the spit. It went on at 10 this evening. It will cook slowly through the whole night over quick coals, and it will be ready for the late suppers of the night watchmen and the early breakfasts of the coal heavers on the Wapping shore at first light. The apprentice boy who turns the spit through the night is a boy of about 14, older than Ned who turned the beef this evening, chosen for the night shift because he has the steadier temperament of an older boy. He turns the handle slowly. He watches the coals. The small hush of the fat falling into the tin pan is the ordinary sound of his long shift. Between the still-lit booths, in the empty rectangles where the packed-down booth stood, the ice is bare and pale. Above them, the great winter constellations turn slowly through their long night. Orion has ridden up higher in the south. The Great Bear has climbed higher in the northeast. Sirius is still burning bright above the low southern horizon. The moon is still not up. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. The watch on the ice is where we are going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. Along the length of the ice, at the wider stretches at either end of Freezeland Street, and at the middle of the fair, the night watch is on its rounds. The night watch on the ice is a small detachment of the ordinary London parish watch, extended by voluntary arrangement to cover the temporary town on the frozen river. The parish watch itself is an old institution, going back in some parts of the city to the reign of Edward I in the 1200s. In the ordinary way of things, each parish keeps a small number of watchmen who walk their beats through the streets of the parish from dusk until dawn, carrying a lantern and a long staff, calling the hours as the church bells strike them, and reporting to the parish beadle at the end of the shift. Their work is to keep an eye on the streets, to challenge a stranger, to help a drunk home, and to raise the alarm at a fire. The watchman at the temple end of the fair tonight is a man of about 55, a retired weaver from Spitalfields, taking the parish watch as his small addition to his old age. Let us call him Thomas. He's a plain, quiet man in a heavy wool coat and a felt hat, with a good horn lantern in one hand and a stout oak staff in the other. He's been on this beat since the fair began, and he knows every booth along Freezeland Street by name and every booth keeper. He walks slowly. He is not in a hurry. The whole point of the parish watch is to be seen walking, in the small, warm, reassuring way of a lit lantern moving steadily through a dark place. He walks the length of the lane from the temple stairs down to the middle of the fair, pauses at the middle and walks back. That is his beat. His round takes about half an hour. He will do it 4 times between midnight and 4 in the morning, and then he will go home to his small warm bed in Spitalfields at first light and sleep till noon. As he walks past each still-lit booth, he touches the brim of his hat to the keeper. At Anne's ale booth, he stops for a moment at the counter and takes a small pot cup of hot spiced ale on the house. Anne insists. It is her small kindness to the watch, and it is a kindness returned in 100 small ways by the watch over the course of the fair. He drinks the ale in 3 slow, careful sips. He wishes her a good night. He walks on. At the coffee booth, the coffee man greets him and offers him a small cup of coffee on the house. Thomas takes it, drinks it, thanks him, walks on. At Croom's printer's booth, Croom greets him and offers him a warm place by the brazier for a minute out of the wind. Thomas stands at the brazier for a minute, warming his hands. Croom asks after his wife, who has been unwell. Thomas tells him she's on the mend. Croom is glad. Thomas walks on. The bells of St. Bride's ring the 12:15. Thomas listens. He counts the 4/4 strokes and the 12 of the hour, in the small, careful way of a watchman keeping his time. He is at the middle of the lane now. He turns and begins to walk back toward the temple stairs. Meanwhile, at the Southwark end of the fair, another watchman is doing the same slow round on the same slow beat. He is a Bermondsey man of about the same age as Thomas, in a similar heavy wool coat and a similar felt hat, with his own good horn lantern in one hand and his own stout oak staff in the other. He walks the length of the lane from the Barge House stairs to the middle of the fair, pauses at the middle and walks back. His round also takes about half an hour. He and Thomas meet at the middle every so often, exchange a nod, and turn back to their own halves of the lane. At the middle of the fair, at the wide stretch of ice near the music booth, a third small watch is on duty. This is a detachment of 2 men from the trained bands of the city, on voluntary night watch for the duration of the fair, in the tradition Captain Edwards began with his day drill on the 26th of January. They are 2 ordinary privates of the trained bands, in their red coats and buff breeches, with muskets shouldered and swords at their belts. They walk slowly up and down the wider stretch, checking that no unattended coach or unattended sledge has been left on the ice, and that no drunk is asleep on the ice where the cold might reach him. The whole small watch of the fair is a small, warm, quiet arrangement. It is not a heavy watch. It is not needed to be heavy. There is very little trouble at this fair in the whole 6 weeks of it. There are, in the records of the Middlesex sessions for the winter of 1683 and 4, no more than a handful of small matters brought in from the ice. A pickpocket, 2 drunks quieted, a small quarrel between 2 Cheapside apprentices settled with a warm word by the watch. That is all. The Frost Fair on the Thames is remembered for its wonder and for its kindness, and for the King's poor fund, and not for any trouble. The bells of St. Bride's ring the half after 12. The bells of St. Clement Danes answer. The bells of St. Martin in the Fields answer them. The great slow single note of St. Paul's tolls the half-hour last. Thomas is at the top of the temple stairs again. He has completed his first round of the second half of the night. He turns and begins his second round. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. The first stirrings of the morning are where we are going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm. The ice holds. It is 3 in the morning now, or as close to 3 as makes no difference. The bells of St. Bride's have rung the 3 strokes of it. The night has run its longest quiet stretch, and along the eastern edge of the London sky, over the Isle of Dogs and the far marshes toward Kent, a very faint first paleness is beginning to show. Not light yet, not even the promise of light, only the first thinning of the deep black of the winter night at the horizon. Along the north bank of the river, at the Wapping wharves a mile below the bridge, the coal heavers are already awake. The coal heavers are the men who unload the sea coal ships that come down the coast from Newcastle with the ordinary daily fuel of the city. They begin their working day at 4 in the morning, in the winter, so as to have the first ships unloaded by the time the coal merchants of the city are ready to buy at 7. At 3, they are already dressing in their small dark rooms in Wapping courts, pulling on wool leggings and thick wool coats and heavy leather boots, drinking a small hot cup of ale, or of small beer, or of a thin oatmeal gruel at their kitchen tables by the light of a single tallow candle. Along Fleet Street on the north bank, the bakers are also already awake. The bakers of London begin their working day at 4 in the morning too, so as to have the first bread out of the ovens by the time the maidservants of the city come to the bakehouse doors at 6 for the day's household loaves. At 3, they are dressing in their small warm rooms behind the shops, and their journeymen are firing the ovens with the first bundles of faggot wood of the day, and the smell of the burning wood is beginning to drift out into the dark alleys of Fleet Street. On the ice, at Croom's printer's booth, the apprentice is up first. Let us call him young Tom. He is the printer's boy we have been watching all night, aged 14, a Fleet Street orphan taken in as an apprentice by Croom 4 years ago. He has slept on a nest of wool blankets on a folded stack of sailcloth against the back wall of the booth, next to a still smaller nest where Croom himself is asleep. He wakes at 3, in the small, quiet way of a boy who has been trained to wake at 3, and he lies for a minute listening to the great quiet of the fair around him. Then he sits up. He pulls his coat on over his shirt and his wool waistcoat. He pulls his stockings up his legs and slips his feet into his shoes. He wraps a wool muffler around his neck. He steps to the brazier at the middle of the booth. The brazier has been banked for the night, the coals heaped to one side and covered with a thin layer of ash. He takes the small iron poker and gently spreads the coals across the pit, so that the fresh air can reach them and reawaken them. Within a minute they are glowing again. He adds a small handful of fresh charcoal from the wooden bucket beside the brazier. The bucket is nearly empty. He will have to fetch more from the coal store at the temple stairs at first light. He takes the small copper kettle. It sits by the brazier through the night, half full of water so that it does not crack from the cold. He walks quietly to the door of the booth with the kettle and steps out into the great cold of the ice. The night sky is enormous. The stars have shifted through their long, slow turn since we last looked up. Orion is now low in the western sky. The Great Bear is standing on its head high in the north. The eastern horizon is that faint, pale thinning of the black. He walks to the small water pail he keeps at the door of the booth. The pail has been standing there all night. A thick crust of ice has formed on the water's surface. He breaks the crust of ice with the handle of the small iron scoop that hangs on the side of the pail. He scoops the fresh water into the copper kettle. He carries the kettle back into the booth and sets it on the brazier. Then he goes to the small stack of paper at the back of the booth and checks it for damp. It is dry. He goes to the tray of type in its wooden case and checks it. Everything is in order. He is a good apprentice. Croom himself wakes now, quietly, in the small warm way of a man who has been an apprentice himself in his day, and knows the small movements of a boy at work in the early morning. He does not speak. He sits up. He pulls his coat and his shoes on. He steps to the brazier, warms his hands, nods to the boy, and takes the small cup of hot water the boy has now poured for him from the kettle. He drinks it slowly. It is not tea, not coffee, not ale. It is just hot water, in the small warm way of a Stuart labouring man's first drink of the morning, when there is no time for the coffee house yet. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm, the ice holds. Along the length of the lane, at each of the still-lit booths, the same small quiet stirrings are happening. Anne at the ale booth is awake and tending her brazier. The coffee man at the coffee booth is grinding his first fresh beans of the day. The spit booth apprentice is turning the pork spit at its slow patient rate. The mum booth is quiet now, its keeper asleep in her nest of wool. The watchmen at either end of the lane are on their last rounds. Below the bridge, in the Pool of London, the first small brig of the day has cast off from a coal wharf at Wapping and is drifting slowly downriver on the ebb tide, its riding light showing at the masthead. Above the pool, the ice holds. Below the pool, the river runs open, dark and quiet, as it has always run. The first light is not yet come, but the first stirrings are done. The night has run its whole warm, quiet stretch, kept by ordinary hands, and the day is about to begin. The dawn on Freezeland Street is where we're going next. The lantern is burning. The brazier is warm, the ice holds. It is a little after 6 in the morning now. The bells of St. Bride's have rung the 6 of it, and behind them the bells of the other city churches, and behind them the great slow single note of St. Paul's. The eastern horizon over the Isle of Dogs is a grey pale rising light now, not yet the sun, but the promise of the sun. In another half hour the sun will lift over the far marshes toward Kent and touch the top of St. Paul's scaffolding, and the day of the 25th of January 1684 will begin. Along the length of Freezeland Street the fair is waking. Anne at the ale booth is warming a fresh pot cup of the hot-spiced ale for the first breakfast customer of the day. The coffee man has 3 cups of fresh coffee on his counter, steaming into the cold air. The mum booth keeper is awake and stretching. The spit booth apprentice is lifting the finished pork off the spit onto a great wooden trencher, to be carved for the coal heavers and the bakers who will come across the ice for their breakfast within the half-hour. At Croom's printer's booth, Croom and young Tom are up and about. Young Tom has swept the small floor of the booth and set out a fresh tray of paper on the counter. Croom has set a fresh chase of type in the bed of the press, with the fair's standard border and the fair's standard motto, ready for the first customer of the day. The lantern at the corner post is still lit. It has burned all night. Its candle is down to its last inch. Along the ice near Whitehall, the first hackney coach of the day has come down the stairs, its 2 brass corner lanterns lit against the grey dawn, its 2 bay horses breathing softly. It is William's coach. He has slept the night in a small room at his hackney yard off Chancery Lane, and he has been up since 4, and he is at the Westminster stand now, waiting for the first fare of the day, which is likely to be a coal merchant going down to the pool. Above the far marshes of Southwark, a great cock crows. Another answers it from a little further off. A third answers that one from further off still. The cocks of the Southwark shore are calling to the cocks of the Isle of Dogs across the paling sky. At the top of Ludgate Hill, the scaffolding of the new St. Paul's stands dark against the grey light. Christopher Wren's dome is not yet a dome. It is still, in this year, only a rising set of walls and the great scaffolding around them. Within 22 years the great dome will be complete, and it will stand at the top of the hill for the next 320 years and more, as it stands there today. Below Old London Bridge, in the pool, the first small brig of the day has now reached the top of the pool, and its watermen are working her into a mooring at a coal wharf on the Wapping side. Behind her, 3 more small brigs are coming up on the flood tide. The day's coal is coming in. Above the bridge the ice holds. The fair is still standing on it. The great winter constellations have wheeled down toward the western horizon. Orion is nearly set. Sirius is nearly set. Only the last of the Great Bear is still visible in the north, standing on its head, dimming in the paling sky. The lantern is burning, the brazier is warm, the ice holds. Let us come back now to the printer's booth at the corner of Freezeland Street, and let us stand for a moment with Croom and young Tom in the small warm ring of the horn lantern that has burned there all night. The whole ordinary night has been kept by ordinary hands. Croom and young Tom have kept the press. Anne has kept the ale, the coffee man has kept the coffee, the mum booth keeper has kept the mum, the spit apprentice has kept the pork. The watchmen at either end of the lane have kept the watch. The boy with the taper lit the lanterns at dusk, and the lanterns burned down to the last inch of their candles, through the small hours, and the last of them is still burning now at Croom's corner. Down on the Wapping shore the coal heavers are unloading the first brig. On Fleet Street the bakers are lifting the first loaves out of the ovens. In 100,000 kitchens across the city, the maidservants are lighting the small kitchen fires of a Restoration London morning. In Sayers Court in Deptford, John Evelyn is up and dressed in his small study, writing at his desk in the last of the candlelight. And you, listening to me tonight, 342 winters from that London dawn. The small lamp at your bedside, the small warmth of your covers, the small quiet safety of the room you are in this moment, is kept for you tonight by the same kind of ordinary hands that kept the lantern at Croom's corner post through the whole quiet dark of the night of the 24th to the 25th of January in the year 1684. The light at your bedside is the same small blessing as the light on the ice. Both are kept for us by unseen hands, and it has always been so. That was the question the hook planted, and that is its gentle answer. Who kept the light for a city walking on top of its own river, on the coldest night that river ever knew? The same kind of people who keep it for us tonight. Let us stay a moment longer beside the brazier in the small warm ring of the horn lantern. Young Tom has laid 2 fresh trenchers of small warm bread on the counter beside a small pot of drippings for his own breakfast and Croom's. Croom pours 2 cups of hot water from the kettle. They stand together at the counter eating the bread with the drippings. Neither of them says much. They have known each other 4 years. They do not need to talk. Outside the booth, the sky is paling. Along the length of Freezeland Street, the last of the horn lanterns are being trimmed for the coming morning. The great cold night is done. The great warm fair will open again in an hour. The ice holds. The fire is banked. The fair is asleep on the ice, and the night will keep till morning. Sleep well, friend. If you would like, tell me in a comment which part of tonight stayed with you. If this quiet history was a good place to fall asleep tonight, a subscribe and a gentle like help these longer nights find the people who want them. Next time we'll go somewhere quite different. Another warm room, another quiet night, another old English world after the light is gone. Until then, sleep well.